Today is Monday, July 21st, 2014. My name is Jason Higgins, and I'm an intern with the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program at the OSU Library. I'm in Stillwater to speak with United States Marine Jim Horn and discuss his experiences during the Vietnam War, as well as his time at OSU. This is part of the Spotlighting Oklahoma Oral History Project. Mr. Horn, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.
Let's begin with when and where you were born.
Born in Stillwater, Oklahoma, January 11th, 1945.
And what was Stillwater like?
Very small town. Very small town. Everywhere you went, everybody knew who you were. I couldn't go anywhere without being called Little Horn. Hey, Little Horn. You know, great environment, really. Poor, nobody had anything. Nobody cared. Everybody was in the same boat together. And it was a great, phenomenal place to grow up. And being a university town, you had a lot of advantages that you would have in a big city with none of the problems of a big city.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about your parents.
My parents ran Varsity Cleaners, dry cleaning shop, and formal wear rental place. And I grew up in that shop and working there from age 9 all the way through college. And yeah, it was a local business.
Did you get a discount on your tuxedo for the prom? Or did you go prom?
Got free tuxedos. And in fact, when they retired and sold the shop, my brother and I both, there's lots of varieties of dinner jackets and tuxedo wear and everything. We got one of each. So we both had a closet full of tuxedos, and I still use them, believe it or not. It doesn't make any difference to me that it's 45 years old, or 50 years old.
Wow.
For me, it has a lot of sentimental attachment, so
absolutely,
I still wear them.
So you have one brother?
One brother and one sister.
Okay. And
younger sister, older brother.
Okay.
So he's a Vietnam vet. He went in the Army through ROTC and went to Vietnam real early in '65.
Interesting. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about the education, the grade school to high school education in Stillwater.
Yeah. Well, it was good. Great teachers. It was that greatest generation of character people, of morality, ethics, character. I didn't have any teachers that I didn't highly respect. And they were all about developing you, helping you grow and learn. It was another advantage of a college town, tremendous emphasis on education and on learning. So it's a priority here. And sports are more of an aside. They were very, very important. We all played sports year-round. Kept you out of trouble,
Right.
But very much an academic environment. A lot of my friends were kids of professors. So some of them were very smart, very smart. We had 7 in our class, co-valedictorians in high school, and they were a very, very bright group of people.
So you went to high school during Kennedy's administration, right?
Yeah, I was actually a freshman in college when Kennedy was assassinated. I was my next class was my psychology class at 2:00, and a moment no one in our generation will ever forget. Wow. You know exactly where you were, what you were doing. When you heard, my best friend called me. I went home to get a sandwich for lunch. My best friend called me and said, "Did you hear President Kennedy's been shot?" I said, "No." I said, "Were they get him in the arm or something?" He says, "No, they shot him in the head." Wow. And so I turned on the TV, and then at 2:00 I went to my psych class. That was fascinating. We had a graduate student teaching the course. And I thought, perfect opportunity here. The country, the world is traumatized, and we're going to psychology class. So this graduate student will come in and we'll talk about it. Everybody needs to talk about this.
Right.
And he came late, and he walked into the classroom building with his hands in his pocket and his head down. He walked up to that little stand, that little podium, and he kicked it, and it slid all the way to the wall. And he looked at us and said, "Class dismissed." Turned around and walked out the door. And I thought, boy, we just lost a great opportunity.
seems that the JFK assassination had a profound impact on your life.
It had, I think, we all felt like we lost an uncle.
Hmm.
They were just so charismatic, so beautiful, so heroic. World War II hero. She's beautiful. She wows every country she goes to. South America, Europe. She speaks the languages, and he once said, "I'm the man accompanying Jackie on the tour."
Talk a little bit about the Cold War rhetoric during your high school years. Did your educators kind of propagate that idea of Cold War?
No, it was, but it was very much a concern. Earlier than that, in grade school, people, they got on a push. Once Russia got nuclear weapons, then there was a fear of them and of what they might do. And so people, my next door neighbors bought a bomb shelter, which of course doubles as a tornado shelter. It's still there.
Wow.
And most of us couldn't afford that, but it was serious enough they did, and other people did, and stockpiled some things. And then during the Cuban Missile Crisis, that was in high school, the world was on the brink of nuclear war at
Right.
that point. If you've watched that in detail, what all transpired and everything, it was very tense. We went to school not knowing if the world was going to be in a nuclear conflagration before the day was over. And grade school and on up, they practice what to do. You get under your desk and under the tables and don't look at the flash. And
Right.
yeah, you wouldn't have done much good if it was very close, but
Right.
it made you feel like you were preparing for something.
Right.
Yeah.
So did you go into ROTC with that Cold War mentality? The Cold Warrior mentality, really?
No, in those days you went into ROTC because it was required.
Right.
2 years was required.
Okay.
And after I started in '63, and we had advisors. Kennedy had advisors and things over there in Vietnam, but no, the Russia was still the big bad bear that people were concerned about. But it was like any other class; you had to take it. And it didn't bother me at all. My uncles had all served in World War II, and my dad had been hit by a car here, hit and run, at University and Washington, and had to have a piece of his skull removed. He almost died.
Wow.
So he was 4F. He was not eligible to go in the military, and a lot of his friends went to World War II. And he had lifelong guilt over that they went, some of them died, and he didn't go.
Wow.
And that's the mentality I had, was that if it ever came time for me to go in the military, I was going to go, because I didn't want to have my dad's guilt of not going.
So it was more of a personal conviction
Yes.
rather than patriotic?
Yes, it was. Well, it was both. When you grow up in Stillwater, Oklahoma in the 40s and 50s, this is the Bible Belt, and it's flag-waving Bible Belt.
Absolutely.
And so, there was, and we grew up watching the movies, Sands of Iwo Jima. My brother took me there. When it came around the second time, I was 9, and I walked out of there and I said, that's what I'm going to do. That's the impact of the media on you.
Right.
As gruesome as that was, that still had an appeal to me. And most guys that go in the Marine Corps develop a desire to go into the Marine Corps over the Air Force.
Well, I wanted to ask,
Navy
why
or-
the Marines?
Well, I think because of that movie. I saw what they did and how they did it. And, there's a lot of actual footage in that movie, including a real captain who fought at Vietnam, in Iwo Jima. And so it was very, very enlightening. It inspired me.
Okay.
It motivated me. And you have to have warriors. If you don't, your country, I believe in peace through strength. I'm a Reagan advocate and type of person, and I think this country is going to find out the hard way that we're making a very bad mistake by denuding our military right now, which is exactly what he's doing to our military.
So, what got you interested in psychology?
Well, I took I started as a freshman, and like most kids, I didn't know what I wanted to major in or be. And I took the introductory courses, and I said, "No, that's the one. That's what I like."
Yeah.
And I thought I was going to be a clinical psychologist. I'm going to go that route. But by the time I was like a junior, I think we went to the state mental hospital in Norman, and we spent a couple of days there. And I came out of that saying, I can't be around those people, psychotic people. That depresses me too much.
Wow, yeah.
I'm not going to be a clinical psychologist.
Understandably so.
By then, I knew what I was facing, though. The war was in full swing, and I graduated in '67. There was no doubt. In the mid '60s, you knew you had a big decision to make, whether you were going to do it or not, and you're going to go, so I didn't have to worry about what I was going to do when I got out of college. I knew what I was going to do. I was going to wind up in the military, and most likely going to Vietnam.
How did you prepare yourself to be deployed to Vietnam?
To be deployed?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I did some special things. I trained in Quantico, Virginia, and one thing I had to do was I had to put on my dress blues, go to Arlington, and salute Kennedy at his grave. Just something I wanted to do and I needed to do. And then when I was in California waiting to go over, I went to Knott's Berry Farm. And Knott's Berry Farm, it's like Disneyland, but they have all the jellies there. And but they have a place called, at that point they called it A Day with Mr. Lincoln or something like that. They had an Abraham Lincoln robot, and I watched that thing. The curtain opened, and he's sitting there, and he looks around, at you. Pretty soon he stands up, and he starts talking, and you're going, you can't believe what you're seeing, because he looks real. It's mechanical movements, but Disneyland, they can, even back then, they could make spectacular things. And that place is now called the Hall of Presidents. They have a bunch of them in there, but they still do the Lincoln thing, and I'd highly recommend it if you ever get to Buena Vista, California. It's phenomenal. And it ends by, glory, glory, hallelujah, with the red, white, and blue kind of faintly in the background of Abraham Lincoln, and just charged my batteries. I was ready to go. In the Marine Corps year, you have to not only be motivated yourself, but you have to be ready to go motivate. If you're an infantry officer like I was, you're tasked with leading a platoon of Marines and motivating them, and so it's an unbelievable challenge.
Did you do basic training while you were in ROTC?
No, you do. You just the 2 years of basic, and then I got out of ROTC. I didn't go advanced.
Okay.
But my senior year in college, I signed up to go to OCS in the Marine Corps.
Okay.
I signed up on the 1st of October of '66, and my senior year, and that committed me to go, and I had a date to go to OCS on 5 September. Before I did that, though, my longtime preacher here in Stillwater, Irving Smith, was a very, very popular. There were two preachers here in Stillwater the college kids loved to go to Sunday and hear them in their sermons. Jim Struthers at the Presbyterian Church, and Irving Smith at the Methodist Church, and he was there for 12 years, so I grew up under him. Dr. Com, who later became OSU's president, was my Sunday school teacher in the 12th grade. That's what I mean about the character we had of those, that World War II generation. They were amazing people. But if you commit yourself to going to the Marine Corps during wartime, what you're going to be doing, And I grew up in a family where we were there every Sunday. We never missed church and Sunday school. And so one day I was taking a religion course from Dr. Irving Smith. And I said, I need to talk to you after class. And And so everybody left, and I said, I have to ask you a question. I said, I'm thinking about signing up for Marine OCS, you know, and what I have to know is, I said, you know, the communists are atheists, you know, and I said, is it okay for a Christian to go to Vietnam and kill communists? And he started dancing. He did not want to answer that question. He knew how important that question was, and how important the answer was to me.
Right.
And he just danced for about 10 minutes. I said, Reverend Smith, I have to have an answer. He danced a little while longer, and here's the way he worded it. No, I can't say it's wrong. Because Methodists are not pacifists. So he's got to stay in line with that.
Right.
But, you know, he's tiptoeing on eggshells.
So there was a moral and spiritual conflict.
Absolutely.
Going.
I thought about it a great deal, you know. And it kind of came down to that, you know. We did have 10,000 Americans who fled and went to Canada.
Right.
And what nobody knows, though, because the media doesn't talk about this side of it, but 30,000 Canadians who had no commitment to this war whatsoever crossed the border, came to America, joined the U.S. military, and went to Vietnam and fought with us. And I had Canadians. I had some Canadians, and they were phenomenal troops. Very mature guys, very disciplined. They made great Marines. And so 3 times as many came as the 10,000 of ours who dodged the draft and went to Canada. But anyway, he said, no, I can't say it's wrong. And I said, that's what I needed to know.
Did you converse with your family about it, about the decision?
Yeah, of course. Your family is very anxious. You don't know that. You don't see that. You're only looking. It's my life. It's my perspective, my commitment, and you can understand that they might not want you to go into the Marine Corps and go to Vietnam for sure, but you can't understand just how traumatic that is for them until you become a father and you have kids the right age to go fight, as I did, you know, for Iraq, Kuwait, you know, Afghanistan. My kids, neither one of them went that way. It was a volunteer army by then, and but you know, some of my friends, Vietnam veteran friends, their sons did go over there and fight, and they still have emotional baggage from Vietnam. So to know your kids going through that was almost overwhelming for some of my veteran friends.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Much easier to go yourself than it is to send your sons or daughters. No doubt about that. In fact, the night my parents got a telegram that I had been wounded, not seriously, but I'd been wounded in action, from that day on, my mother, the rest of her life, had high blood pressure, just like that. That's what it did to her.
Wow.
Yeah. So I had guilt over that. I mean, you do that to your mom, that's, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the mindset of a Marine? How does the Marine Corps train an individual to become a Marine?
Well, you know, they shave your head, they strip you of everything you had before, and they build you into, you know, the Marines are unique in that everybody's a Marine. If you're the commandant, you're still just a Marine. If you just graduated from boot camp, you're a Marine. And we don't differentiate, you know, like the other branches do. And we have one purpose, and it's fighting. And so everything is focused around that. And, you know, there's an old World War II poster. It's actually a woman saying, if you want to fight, join the Marines. And I've told other young men who've been thinking about that, if you want that experience, you know, it'll change your life forever. But if you want to fight for your country, the Marine Corps is where you're probably going to have a chance to do that. So it's you know, you're taught disciplines, tactics, weapons, familiarity, leadership, camouflage. You're you're trained physically beyond anything you ever dreamed of in sports. You get into a condition, and when you get in that good a shape, your confidence level is so high, you are ready to take on anything. And it's a challenge, and it's one that it's a very winning mentality. And I did that. I had all the experiences: platoon commander, executive officer, company commander, and to this day, it's still the greatest honor of my life, was leading a company of Marines in Vietnam. Those guys were beyond belief. You had to ask them to do the impossible, and they would do it anyway.
Can you talk a little bit about, this is 67, so this is
Yeah.
the height of the civil rights movement back stateside. Can you talk about race and what that means in the Marine Corps?
Well, you had the best and the worst in the Marine Corps. Some of my most outstanding Marines, bar none, including my drill instructor, whose picture's still on my fridge. He retired as a master gunnery sergeant. That's the highest rank you can go and listen. Were black and were phenomenal Marines. The ones who had the attitudes, though, were big problems. And so we had very little of that problem in Vietnam in the field. But I started, when they first sent me over there, I was with the Base Defense Battalion at Da Nang. So you're more in the rear. You're getting rocketed, but you're not having many firefights and stuff. I did lose my first Marine there, and he happened to be an Oklahoma City Marine who was coming home a month later and getting married, and I still go to his grave in Oklahoma City when I'm there. But it wasn't constant, ferocious, conventional warfare like it was when I was with 3rd Marine Division up north against the North Vietnamese. But my drill instructor, Ed Baines, he hammered it into us: there's only one color in the Marine Corps, that's green. And I liked that concept, and I absorbed it and internalized it. And when I got my platoon, I told them the same thing. And there were some Southerners in there that brought their biases with them.
Right.
One of them was a good sergeant. He was a very good sergeant, but I knew he was biased, And so I stood up there and I told him, I said, there's only one color in the Marine Corps. And I said, we're not going to have any of these black, white, brown, yellow issues here. And I said, and I mean this both ways. I'm not just talking about this color to this color. I'm talking about this color to this color to this,
Right.
Everybody's going to be treated the same. Well, in my training, that was emphasized. They just want to be treated equally. And if you set that straight, I didn't have any problems. And in fact, later on, when another platoon did have some racial tension, not big problems, but just tension, my black platoon sergeant, who was only an E5 sergeant, took my platoon as an E5 sergeant. He became a platoon commander, and I said, Robert Jackson from Mississippi, I said, you can do it. You can do it. And he could. And I took over this other platoon for a while, laid down the law to them. That took care of the problem. So they are trained to follow, and if you set the right example for them, and that's what it's all about. They told us, when you get over there and you get your platoon, within a few weeks to a month, they're going to have your personality. They really are. These are young 18-year-old kids,
Right.
And to them, if you're 22 or 23, you're not young anymore.
Right.
As odd as that seems.
An old man by that time.
Yeah. And so I addressed those issues, but I have to tell you, I was unbelievably disappointed to be out with 3 of my fellow lieutenants in basic school. We went into D.C. And on the way back to Quantico, over the radio, it was announced that Martin Luther King had been assassinated. And they all cheered.
Wow.
And I sat there and I said, don't you realize what's going to happen Don't you realize what this means? And of course, the whole country rioted. D.C., we drove through there, things were burning. And the way they finally got control of D.C., they took the troops from the school's demonstration troops at Quantico. These were all Marines who had already been to Vietnam. They had all their gear, their bayoneted rifles, their gas masks and everything. And all they did was they took them to D.C. and set them on every corner. They put a Marine on every corner. And one look at them, and the rioter said, I'm going home. That was it. You know, pure intimidation. And with good reason. I mean, if you would have messed with them, they would have treated you like they handled people in Vietnam that were trying to kill them. You know, it worked. It worked. So that was a real lesson. But I was really disappointed. You know, and these aren't Southerners I'm in the car with either. You know, I mean, my Chicago roommate was one of them, and he was as bigoted as anybody from the South, and that was not. A lot of people think that you know, bigotry, the home of bigotry is in the South, but you know, a lot of blacks migrated up to the North and moved back to the South because they said they weren't treated any better up there than they were in the South, and South was their home.
Right.
And of course, it's a whole new world now, you know, that we could even elect a black president, and which shocked the world, I think.
Right.
And a lot of Americans, including black people, who said that he'll never get elected, and he did.
So tell me a little bit, was your world shocked whenever you sat down in Vietnam? Did you take a plane ride over? Talk about the trip
You go to,
Vietnam.
in the Marine Corps, what you do is you go to Okinawa, and you have staging there. That gives you a few days to acclimate to 100% humidity and 100-degree weather. And when you're flying in to land in Okinawa, the water starts running on the window, and you're going, it's raining. It can't be raining. The sky's blue. What's going on? It's that humid.
Wow.
It's that humid. When you took a shower in Okinawa and you dried off with a towel, you couldn't get dressed before you were wet again. The humidity, the heat, the sweat. So anyway, so that was good for us. That gave us a few days there. There were veterans there who were on their way back. It was good to talk to them. That's eye-opening to hear, okay, the training's over, now here's what it's really like, you know. And so I learned some good things from those guys. We actually went through a little more training. You go through a booby-trapped course, you know, and I was the only one who tripped a booby trap, and I said, well, that's why I'm a lieutenant, you know. That's why I'm not on the point. You guys are good at it, and I wasn't. So, but that's where you want to trip a booby trap, is in Okinawa, not in Vietnam,
Right.
where you come back in a bag or without some limbs.
You mentioned talking with other veterans in Okinawa. I've read accounts where there was a fair amount of hazing to the new guys, right? To like the FNGs coming into Vietnam, and they'd be like, oh, he won't make it a month or so. Was there any of that at all, or was that kind of just in the literature?
Well, they were FNGs, but, oh boy, I mean, hazing, I can't reach that word at all. Yeah, it was a little, I'd say not as bad even as in pro sports.
Right, okay.
There's some real hazing, you know.
Hazing was the wrong word.
Yeah. Oh yeah, well, you know, they kid you, but that's no different than when you went to the 7th grade here, and the big thing was to pull your trousers down, you know, and that's what the 8th and 9th graders wanted to do. So we all banded together and watched each other. I mean, it's life.
Right.
Everywhere you go.
So after the last ditch efforts at training and preparation for Vietnam, what then?
Then you got on an airplane. It was amazing. When I left Camp Pendleton, that was amazing too. I'm in there watching TV, waiting for the bus that'll take us to the airport so we can fly to Vietnam. I'm in there with one of my very best friends in the Marine Corps, Gordon Jackson, Jacobson, and retired attorney in Seattle now. But Jake and I are watching Robert F. Kennedy's funeral on June 8th of 1968. And just the most sickening feeling. I wouldn't have voted for Robert Kennedy, but what happened made us sick all over again, just like with JFK.
Right.
And halfway through the funeral, the Marine opened the door and said, "The bus is here." And I looked at Jake and I said, "You know what? I'm ready to get out of this country for a while. This makes me sick." You know, you had April and June, Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy, never should have happened.
Right.
Either one of them never should have happened, and it's horrible. And JFK before that, so it's like, yeah, I've had enough of this place. I think I'll go to Vietnam. You know, I mean, it really did give me that feeling. I was glad to be getting out for a while.
Interesting. Talk about your first day in Vietnam. Do you remember landing in Vietnam?
I remember stepping off the airplane, and it's like stepping into a sauna. That's what you remember.
Mm.
And the new Marine Corps Museum outside of Quantico is so attuned to detail. When you open the double doors to walk into the Vietnam section, it's 10 degrees warmer and it's humid.
Mm-hmm.
They just reminding you. And you go through the Korean doors, it's 10 degrees colder.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a 350,000 square feet museum, and they're not finished yet. It's still growing. But anyway, so I stepped off of that plane, yeah, and you're just saying, well, so this is it, huh? And, you know, the Da Nang Air Base was the busiest air base in the world.
Mm-hmm.
They had a takeoff or landing every 28 seconds. So, and when those Phantom jets take off with their afterburners on, you can't talk to each other. I mean, it's loud.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I spent my first 6 months, near there, defending the Da Nang Air Base. And it was an infantry battalion, but we were called 1st MP Battalion, but we didn't do any MP duties. We had 3rd MP Battalion that did all the MP duties in the Da Nang area, and then we had to defend the base and do all the searching and ambushing and patrols and all of that stuff. So we were MPs in name only.
Was there a lot of VC in the area around Da Nang at all?
No, but we got infiltrated sometimes, and you know, they would come in and there'd be a little firefight and they'd be killed, but we had a lot of indigenous people around us. They were all friendly, and the kids were the snitches. They would tell us, VC come tomorrow. I mean, they knew.
Wow.
They knew, and they were definitely on our side. They're the cutest kids in the world.
So, talk a little bit about that. Talk about the civilian populations. Did
Yeah.
you develop semi-relationships with the civilians?
Absolute relationships, because those people, a lot of them would move close by because they wanted to be safe.
Mm-hmm.
And they figured if they were close to the Marines, they were safe, and you know, very logical unless you got too close to the wire. And I know one night a rocket came in and landed short. It didn't get to our perimeter, but it landed on a hooch, you know, and I listened to the dying screams of a beautiful young woman and her little baby that I'll never forget, you know. And that was because they were too close to the wire, you know, very sad thing. But the rest of them, we did a lot of work with them. We were always getting extra surplus supplies, and we'd take them out to the village, and they loved it. And the guys loved going on patrols because the kids just swamp you. You know, they liked us. They really liked us. We had great relationships. We had, what do we call those? We took our corpsmen, there was a name for it. We took our corpsmen, and they would take their medical supplies, and then they could treat, you know, little things, maladies, infections. The big thing for the Vietnamese was taking sabon, soap, and convincing them you need to wash with soap, be clean. You know, they lived on dirt floors, and which they kept clean with their little brush brooms. But you know, it's third world country.
Right.
It smelled like a third world country, and that's the thing that's always missing if you watch stuff on TV or in the movies. Is the smells are pretty amazing. You know, you get used to it. The Nook Mom is fermented fish sauce, and that's their favorite seasoning for their food. When you first get there, it's like, you know, the smell. But within 6 months, I was flavoring my food with it. I still do. I still have it. I still flavor food with it. I still get Vietnamese food here. That lady who has that wagon here is a boat person. And for me, that's who we fought for, so they would never have to do that. And, a million of them did that, and 200,000 of them died. And the rest of them were raped, robbed, and beat up and all that kind of stuff. And so that was the hardest part of the Vietnam War for me, was when it fell in '75, quite frankly. And I was involved in some pretty heavy stuff.
You mentioned the medical treatments.
Yeah.
There was immunizations and things like that.
Yeah.
Did you ever experience where either the VC or the NVA would retaliate against civilians who took these types
Not
of
in that Da
immunizations?
Nang area. If you were further out, outlying 1st Marine Division was south of us, and they worked a lot of rural villages and hamlets, they are the ones who had to deal with that. And that's one of the reasons why I put in to go to 3rd Marine Division, not 1st Marine Division. I didn't go to Vietnam to babysit the Air Force and their airplanes, is the way I looked at it.
Right.
To me, that wasn't doing what I trained to do, and I felt like I could do it, and do it well. I had a lot of confidence in myself. And so I put in to transfer to 3rd Marine Division, and that was very conventional up there, against conventional warfare against North Vietnamese regulars. Very, very different than VC tactics,
Absolutely.
with all the booby traps and the ambushes and
So you
stuff.
didn't experience that type of warfare, the guerrilla warfare?
Not with the, not where there was retaliation on the civilians, no. Yeah, we didn't have to deal with that, because that's, you had the cities up there, and then you didn't have little hamlets everywhere up north. It was less populated because it's mountains.
Right.
There were some mountain yards over in the Ashaw Valley who'd been co-opted by the NVA when they moved 2 divisions in there. So the mountain yards had no choice. It was either side with the NVA or they'll kill you. So we got VC'd by them a little bit, a few times, and but that was, rest of the time it was slug it out.
So you spent 6 months at Da Nang.
Yeah.
Was the Marine Corps, was the required time in the Marine Corps 6 months for an officer?
No, it was 13 months. All Marine tours were 13 months.
So that's Army. I'm thinking of with the officers, a 6-month tour, perhaps.
Oh, I think you're thinking of in the field.
In the field,
Yeah, if you were in the field, then they would try to get you out of there in 6 months. If you survive 6 months, leading troops in combat, you were pretty worn out, and that's about right, maximum, I'd say. So that was the goal, to try to pull them back. That wasn't always done. I knew guys who stayed as platoon commanders for a year, for 13 months. So that was just a goal. The Army probably, they had more people, more supplies. They were probably able to do that better,
Right.
But they sent my brother over there. He only had 5 months left in the Army when they sent him to Vietnam, which we thought, wow, 5 months. But they sent him.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Tell me what qualities define a good leader in the field in Vietnam.
Well, you have to set the example. You have to, everything is about example. Example is not the best way to influence others, it's the only way. So you've got to show strength, endurance, conditioning. They got to know that they're not fodder to you, that you care about them, but that we have a mission to do, and you're going to lead them through that mission. And it's a matter of building rapport, and once you've got it, they will follow you off a cliff. And I looked at my superiors the same way. There were people I would have followed off a cliff, and there were others, I wouldn't have pinch hit it for. Character, I think it's the same as any kind of leadership qualities, where you're fair, You're not biased, and if you are, you sure can't show it. And you have to be competent. They have to believe in you. As the saying goes, you better have your shit together. Because if you don't, that's going to be a real problem, and you're going to get people killed probably if you don't. So you got to have extremely good judgment. You got to be able to make a decision, and over there, those decisions sometimes had to be made very, very quickly, and they were monumentous decision regarding people's lives, you know, and the mission. So.
How many days would you be out in the field at a time?
Well, once I transferred, you know, we just did short things down in the Da Nang area because we got to go back and sleep in hoochies. Except we'd sleep on the lines too, in the bunkers and stuff, and that was interesting. You know, the mosquitoes were beyond belief. So you take one of those old wool blankets and just put it over you, lay on a cot inside the bunker because we were getting rocketed by Soviet 140s and 122 millimeter rockets. Those are pretty nasty things. But your whole perspective changes when you're facing that kind of danger. And I was lying, we had rats in the bunkers, you know, big rats, big rats. And with the length of their tail, they'd be this big. And I'm lying there with that blanket over my face one night, and I hear a little scurry, you know. Next thing I know, a rat, so I've got the blanket over my face, the rat, he lands right on my face. And my response was to sit up at the same time I'm keeping my hand under this blanket. I don't want to grab him with my bare hand. I don't want to get bit by a rat, you know. But I just lean up, I grab him, now the blanket goes down, and I throw him as hard as I can. 55-gallon barrels are full with sand. That's what your base of your bunker's built on. And I just tried to throw him against that thing as hard as I could. And I laid back down and went to sleep. That's not a problem. Rats not a problem. There are problems out there, but this is not one of them. That's how much your perspective can change.
Right.
You know.
So were you shelled frequently at night?
Yeah, Da Nang, you know, they're always trying to get the airplanes. They were trying to blow up the airplanes. So, yeah, there were a fair number of rocket attacks and sometimes big mortar attacks, mostly rockets. And, you know, we never lost anybody to the rockets except that poor lady and her baby, you know, right outside of my wire there. But I know when I extended and went back for my second tour, I was going to be a civil affairs officer. That's what I extended for, just to work with the civilians in that area. And I was sleeping in a hooch by the airstrip, and we got rocketed, and a 140 millimeter rocket landed right behind my hooch, and it just picked me up and dropped me on the floor. Put a piece of shrapnel in my boot, but not in me. And I got up. I walked through the back door, and you couldn't see. It was just black powder, dirt, powder, permeated the air. You did that, you couldn't see your hand. You know, it was that thick. And I walked out there, and out loud I said, "Welcome back to Vietnam, Jim Horn." And then I paused, and then I said, "You may have made a very big mistake." Right. And that was my welcome back. But I was a civil affairs officer. I had no more close calls, none. That second tour, just the first night, and I was so glad I didn't get killed. My parents, I mean, first night back, it's like, why did he do it? They would have died thinking about that. You know, at old age, they'd still been thinking about that. So that's what you think about when you think you're going to die. Your parents, people you love, you know. So, but like I said, you don't have time. You get too many other things to think about to be too worried about some of the other stuff, you know.
So during your time in the 3rd Marines, tell me about the baptism in fire?
Yeah. Well, I had a great introduction. I was just incredibly lucky. When they transferred me up in early January of 1969 they put me in the 3 shop, which is the operations shop of the battalion. The S3 is the operations officer of a battalion. And so I was, he already had a couple of assistants, so I was like the 3 Charlie, an Alpha and a Bravo and a Charlie. And I was a first lieutenant, but I had not been in kind of combat those guys were involved in. This is heavy stuff. And ironically, our very first operation was the whole regiment, the 9th Marine Regiment, going into the Ashaw Valley on Operation Dewey Canyon, which was the biggest and most successful Marine operation of the whole war.
Wow.
And here I am in the operations shop, so I'm getting to hear how this whole thing is run on a battalion level, coordinated with the regiment, down to the companies. And so that was unbelievable break for me. And then as we would have casualties, the 3 Alpha would go out and take that guy's place, and then the Bravo would go out. So now I'm working with the major, who was a legend in the Marine Corps. We called him Boom Boom Collins because he was so gungy. He actually trained us at Quantico, and then he was over there, and I wind up in the same battalion with him. He was an Irishman, crazy. He had 3 or 4 silver stars, and an amazing guy. But anyway, I learned an awful lot, and I saw how they work. So then after 3 or 4 weeks of that, I was transferred to be the executive officer. You know, we lost a guy, so I went to be the executive officer of Golf Company. And and this guy, the CEO, Dan Hitzelberger, was a Navy Academy graduate, and he was top notch. He never accepted what I said, but I told him, you can't imagine how much I learned from you, watching you run this company, how to be a company commander. I hadn't done that, you know, especially up there. And so I learned an awful lot, and then he got a really bad infection. He was getting short, but he had to leave a little early because he got a really bad infection in a very bad place. And they swelled up like really big.
Wow.
He was out of there. And so I inherited the company, and we were lucky. We had kind of a break. We even had a little R&R going to Quaviet, if you can call anything in Vietnam on R&R. I thought it was ironic, you know, to call it that, because you're very near the DMZ, which is a constant threat. And then we were sent to defend Kajia Bridge, and half of my company was new because we'd had an awful lot of casualties in Dewey Canyon. And so we spent that time FAM firing, as it's called. You got these new guys, they're all good with their weapons in the United States. They've all done that. It's different to be in Vietnam. Now I want you to get used to you shooting your weapons in Vietnam. So we got them used to it, and that was really good, because once we left Kajia Bridge, then we started getting into regular contacts, you know, little battles, big battles, and their performance is still mind-boggling to me. The one thing I always say is the worst thing you can ever do in your life is to engage a Marine rifle company in combat. You don't want to do that. That's the worst mistake you'll ever make, because they will kick your asses.
And did the NVA engage in the conventional warfare sense?
Oh yeah. They had everything, you know. At one point they even had tanks on the next ridge, but it wasn't a fair fight. You know, we had air superiority, so if you have the air, you know, we used that. And then they had artillery. They had 122s artillery on Dewey Canyon, and I got a tremendous appreciation for what they went through by that, because when they're shooting artillery at you and it's screaming over your head and blowing up around you, it's terrifying. And you're waiting, you can hear it coming, and you're waiting to see if you're going to be alive or not in 3 seconds. And I thought, and this is nothing compared to what those guys have to endure, because we put a lot more of this stuff on them than they do on us. But it gave me a real appreciation for them, and they were brave. They were kind of selfless. Just amazed me, even the sapper attacks where they would attach TNT to their back and lay down a base of fire to get the Marines to put their heads down, and they'd crawl up. They had tarps over their backs so you couldn't see them. This is at nighttime. And then they'd stop the base of fire, and the sappers would jump into the hole with the Marines, pull the string, everybody blew up.
Wow.
So kamikazes on the ground, basically, and so you had to deal with that. And I could, very hard to understand how you could get somebody to do that, you know. And we captured 3 of them one night in a big fight. And I sat down with them in the morning and gave them a cigarette and coffee, and we just sat there. I had my interpreter, just the 3 of us, you know. And I asked them all the same question, what was your mission? And they said to attack Golf 29 at 038631. Those were our exact coordinates. They knew. So we knew they were listening to our radios the way we were listening to theirs. And how do you feel about being down here? Well, I don't want to come. I didn't want to come. Why did you come? Well, I had to come. Why didn't you want to come? Because of all of my friends, they all said the same thing. Of all of my friends who came down here before me, none of them have ever come back. And you didn't want to be a North Vietnamese soldier engaging us, you know. It was a tremendous loss for them, but, you know, that wasn't, they didn't care. Their leaders didn't care. He said, I lost 1 million, I'll lose 2 million. Doesn't make any difference to me. So anyway, but you know, my second tour when I went back, I had 53 Vietnamese working for me. I had a very close relationship with them then. A secretary from Saigon who was just a wonderful lady. My chief interpreter was from Hanoi. And but in 1954, when they divided Vietnam, he was 8, and they lived in Hanoi. And they put everything they could on their shoulders. You ever seen the poles with the bags on either end? That's the way they carry stuff. Everything they could carry, they walked 380 miles south to Dalat so they could live in a free country.
Wow.
That's what Sergeant Min told me, you know. So this is my chief interpreter, and devout Buddhist, doesn't even describe him. He was a pure Buddhist. And I've always said he's one of the 5 best Christians I've ever known in my life, because if being a Christian is being Christ-like, that's Sergeant Min. He wouldn't even criticize other people. You know, he just believed in self-improvement. That's what your life's about, being the best person you can be. And unforgettable person. He writes me a Christmas card before I left, and he ends it by saying, "May Christ's message of peace be yours." It's a Buddhist.
Do you know how he felt about having a minority Catholic government at that time?
Never any concern about that. He only had one concern, that was the communists. He was the mildest guy you've ever seen, but I said, Sergeant Root, how do we deal with the communists? And it was like this change. It was like a serial killer when he had, I'm going to kill you. The change of everything. He says, you have to be ruthless, because it's the only thing they understand. And it was like, wow, you know. We were doing a sweep one time, and there was a Buddhist facility there, and the monks were up by the gate, and one of them was yelling and screaming at our Marines. And Sergeant Min was watching him and getting upset. He says, excuse me, you know. He goes over, and I see him yelling at this monk like this, you know. And he comes back, and he's got tears running down his cheeks. And Sergeant Min, what was that about? What did you tell him? He said, I told him, you're a Buddhist monk. You do not behave like this. You're a Buddhist monk. He had to chew out a Buddhist monk. Made him cry to do it.
Wow.
And that's what I'm talking about. This guy was unbelievable. Anyway, so those, and I had a bunch of those working for me, so I was very, very committed to the South Vietnamese, you know.
Before we get back to your second tour, could Was there any time during your first tour that you could describe an episode of extraordinary elements involved? Anything that you found particularly hard to deal with?
Well, yeah, when you lose, I lost 9 guys one night. That's hard to deal with. You write condolence letters and didn't often get answers back. But I got one from Rome, Georgia, from Valentina Seegers, and her son had been my mortar section team leader. And he was actually done and been replaced, and had already written her and say, "Mom, I'm safe. I don't have to go to the field anymore. I'll be home a few weeks." Well, the guy, his replacement, got a real bad eye infection, and the corpsman said, "You can't go out in the field. You got to go to the hospital." And Tommy Seegers, being Tommy Seegers, said, "No problem. I'll take it." And he went back out, and then, of course, he gets killed. So I get this letter from Valentina Seegers, and it says, "War," it's from Rome, Georgia Gazette. It says, "War has dominated the life of Valentina Seegers. She's Ukrainian. And when the Nazis went through the Ukraine on the way to Moscow, trying to get to Moscow, she was 16. They enslaved her. You don't even want to imagine what that meant, to a 16-year-old girl who had been enslaved by the Nazis. Because, the Nazis, they raped and pillaged their way all the way to Stalingrad, and turned around. But it was the ultimate inhumanity to man. And then the Russians did the same thing coming back through. So those people got it both directions. Unbelievable. But anyway, so she says, I was enslaved, but we were liberated. Where I was sent, we were liberated by Americans. And I married one of those Americans, Tommy Seegers Sr. And we came back to the States, had 3 kids, and they got divorced. But she sends me this letter, telling me her story along with that article of her getting Tommy's medals from the local Marine recruiter. And the letter says she had 3 kids. She says, "When Tommy died, a third of me died with him, 3 kids. But I know the price of freedom."
Wow. That is extraordinary.
Yeah. For a mother to say that, a Gold Star mother to say that it's beyond belief. His sister contacted me last year out of the blue, found me, and we haven't been able to get together. She's still down there, but someday we may.
Gives you something to look for.
Great kid, great young man though. One of those losses you don't forget. And usually for an officer, it's your radio man. I lost three killed, and they're the closest relationship you have in combat because they're sitting right there with you, and they get killed right in the hole with you, and are right behind you or right next to you, and that's up close and personal. Your training is you can't let anything stop you from doing what you have to do. And there's a training video we watched that said, "What now, Lieutenant?" And that was everything was going south really bad, and then they turn to you and say, "What now, Lieutenant?" And you better be thinking straight and come up with the right answer, or more people are going to die. So, but you don't forget those losses, and that's another grave I haven't been to that I should go to. I need to go to.
Could you talk a little bit about what it felt like to be in the field with the privates, being a Marine and that mentality?
Yeah. One of the reasons I wanted to go in the Marine Corps was because I knew who these young men were. They grew up fighting. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to go to war, you better go with a bunch of fighters. Mm-hmm. And they weren't drafted. And I was reticent to go to Vietnam and be an infantry officer with a bunch of people who'd been drafted. That didn't sound very reliable for me. So I thought, well, In fact, I've often joked the safest place to be in Vietnam would be a company commander, because they had to get through a whole company of Marines to get to you. And that's not exactly true, but I mean that's one way to look at it. So and they don't want you hurt or killed as a platoon commander or a company commander, because there's a gap in leadership at that moment, and that's a critical time. If the next in command steps up and has it together mentally and can take on the responsibility immediately, no problem. But if they don't, it's
Chaos.
anarchy. Yeah, it's chaos.
Was there any one particular moment where you felt that your life was more in danger than in other moments?
Oh yeah, if you're a Marine in war, you're going to have a lot of those, and my first one was they took the bridge south of Da Nang, and our battalion went and took it back, and then I wound up there with just my platoon and a battalion of Vietnamese Rangers. Those guys had been at Khe Sanh, so I had total confidence in them, and but it was just my platoon and them, and they had the Viet Cong had captured a 50 caliber machine gun, and it was at max range. It was 2,000 yards, but it was within range, and I was standing on the edge of the bridge there on the road, and I saw the flashes, but before I could even do anything, I had this halo of rounds, 50 caliber rounds, and I could tell from the sound they were on this side, they were above me, and they were on this side. I was like, that's one of those experiences where you're trying to figure out how you didn't get hit,
Right.
But that was when I was at Da Nang, and I had an experience there one night when we were getting rocketed, and we all ran and jumped into the bunkers, and I had a staff sergeant standing there with a cup of coffee in the door of the hooch, watching everything, like this, drinking his coffee and looking around. So when it was over, I went up and I said, Staff Sergeant so-and-so, what the were you doing? And he says, I said, how come you didn't go get in the bunker like everybody else? He says, well, sir, he says, this is my second tour in Vietnam. If there's one thing I learned in my first tour, it's that if it's not your day, you don't have to worry about it. If the bullet or the rocket doesn't have your name on it, you don't have to worry about it. If it is your day, it doesn't make any difference what you do. It's your day. And I looked at him and silently said, he's crazy. And I walked away. But after I transferred to 3rd Marine Division, there were a lot of those moments. People who were wounded and killed in front of me, beside me, behind me. And I had been nicked. I'd been wounded, a minor wound, shrapnel wound. So that, then you know that you're not invincible. It can happen to you. That's a real mind-boggling experience, life-changing experience. But as these people are being killed around me up north, I found myself thinking, wonder if what he said is true, that it's either your day or it isn't, And the very next time it happened, then I said, he must be right. I internalized that. Well, that totally frees you up. You now are out there, and your focus is not whether or not you're going to live or die, because it's not up to you. It's kind of deterministic. And I use that many, many times with police, working in horrible places like East LA, where they have to fight every day, and every day could be their last. In emergency rooms, where people went crazy and hurt people, and then the emergency staff didn't want to go back to work, and I talked to the medical staff, and I went over that with them, and I said, that's what worked for me over there. And If it's not your day, you don't have to worry about it. And I said, I don't know if that's true or not, but I do know if you internalize that, then pressure's off.
Wow.
And so it's just one of those things that that you learn that help you survive, you know, or you adapt and it helps you survive.
Did you ever carry any good luck charms, or were you superstitious?
My good luck charm was the little red New Testament that my grandmother gave me for graduation from high school. And I carried that. I also, because they're Catholic or they're not Protestant, you could buy a crucifix. You couldn't just buy a cross, but you could buy a crucifix. And I'm not Catholic, but I bought one of those, and I put there's a rubber lining you put on your dog tags, keep them from jingling and making noise. Well, I put one of those on that crucifix, and I put it here next to my dog tag. And that was my other. And that I grew up in church and was a strong believer, and that made a tremendous amount of difference for me. And the night I lost those 9 guys, I had at one point this radio operator in the hole with me was dead, and this one was wounded, and so it was like, well, this may be the night, you know, and you may not see the sun come up this morning. And so I reached in there and I grabbed that crucifix. I held it in my hand. I just looked up and I said, Lord, I don't know if I'm going to make it to the morning or not, but I do know that it's not up to me, that it's up to you. And I just want you to know that whatever you decide is okay with me. And not the first time I've done that, actually, either. And anyway, in the midst of this kind of chaotic gunfire, massive explosions, we had 5 artillery batteries supporting us. 3 of them were firing high explosives, 2 of them illumination. We had the spooky gunship overhead. That thing fires 6,000 rounds a minute. Every 5th round's a tracer, and there's just this red sheath coming down, and the sound is, they can't produce it. It's an unbelievable sound. But in the midst of that chaos, I experienced the peace that passes all understanding. When I said, it's up to you, and I accept your decision, whatever it is. And so that thing in the Bible talks about the peace that passes all understanding. I know what that peace is. You know, I've been there. And in the least likely place, but that's what it's for. And for me, that was my main source of support. I also fell in love in Sydney on my first R&R with a gal. Her dad, they had been in D.C. for 3 years, and he was the Australian representative of the World Bank. Well, my roommate, who was a son of a rich Chicago banker, knew them because his dad was the big banker. And he kept telling me, when you go to Sydney on R&R, be sure and look up the Bartleys, you know. I said, sure, yeah, be glad to do it, you know. And he said that over and over again back in the States in training. And then I ran into him in Vietnam a month before I was going on R&R to Sydney. And his last thing, be sure and go see the Bartleys, you know. And I said, yeah, sure, Tom. He says, they have 3 daughters. And I said, what's the address? And sure enough, you know, the one our age was still in the States. She stayed on for a little while. But the 19-year-old was there, and it was... So she was writing me every day, and I had actually broken off my relationships with American girls, girlfriends from college, because I said, I can't do this and that, you know. And realistically, you know, I don't want to do that to you. There's, you know, I know what can happen over there as a Marine infantry officer, so I just broke them off, you know. And then I go there and fall in love. So I wound up going back 3 more times and counting my extension over there. She came over for a month in March of '70, but we couldn't get our highs and lows together at the same time, so we wound up not getting married. But we did stay in touch, and through kids and the death of her mom and stuff. And so they were phenomenal. And the Aussies, you know, put it on your bucket list. Go to Australia. Absolutely. Australians like Yanks. They still call us Yanks.
Right.
they like us. And the only other place I'd been where I felt that way was maybe in Scotland. But
did you ever work with international forces in Vietnam, such as the Australians, the Thai, or the Koreans?
the Koreans were inside our perimeter at Da Nang, but interestingly, they ran the laundry. But they were former Korean Marines. And
Wow.
every morning at 6, they were out there doing karate, Korean karate, you know. And they were good. They were really good. They, only one time that I know of, 2 of them got mad at each other and they squared off. One kick to the chest, fight's over. This guy turned blue. We thought he was going to die.
Wow.
Probably disrupted his heart for a little while, but that's, you didn't mess with them.
Yeah.
Now, these same guys, in Korean culture, even a bunker is a dwelling, a residence.
Mhm.
You would never, ever enter anybody's residence without first asking permission and receiving permission.
Mhm.
So the rockets would come in, they would run to the bunkers and ask permission to go into the bunker of the Marines.
Wow. Doesn't seem very practical.
No, but that's how strong their culture is.
Absolutely. So, you discussed times such as losing 9 men in one night. I'm sure you
Yeah.
lost several men. How did you cope in the field with that?
Well, you do a service, and like I said, you still have well over 200 men depending on you. You can't dwell in the past, yesterday or 5 minutes ago. You better be in the second. You better be in the now.
Right.
That's in your training, and of course, it's obvious. I mean, there's no time for that. I only cried one time in Vietnam, and that was one of the radio operators I lost got shot in the back out of a spider hole. We never found the guy. And we had to we were in triple canopy in the jungle in the mountains, and so there was no way to land a helicopter, and they had to lower what's called a Neil Robinson sling through the trees, get him in there, and put him in there. And we were hopeful he was going to make it. And greatest personality in the world. On his bush cover, he wrote, "If you think sex is exciting, try incoming." His name was Bliss. Perfect name for this guy. Bliss. And anyway, I put, got him all strapped in, and there's a strap that goes on his head. And as he started going up, that strap came loose. His head dropped down like this. And it scared him, and he looked at me, and that just got me. And he looked at me, and he saw the tears coming down my cheeks, and he smiled at me. And then the next day, we were told that day he was going to make it. And the next day, the battalion XO called me up and said he was killed, that he died, and which was pretty shocking, stunning, because you don't play favorites, but you have favorites, and he was my favorite. And so I was really upset by that. And this is when you find out how you can, what's inside of you and what you can become. And, I knew the next time we got involved in a contact that they were going to pay for this. And I made sure that happened.
And this is NVA troops.
This is NVA, yeah. We got hit, and these guys fled, and I had some guys chasing them, and I had them keep chasing them until they got them. And I felt good about it. And I've told chaplains and preachers, don't judge people about their emotions. I'm not saying it's ethically right or anything like that, killing in war, but I'm saying, what I'm telling you is sometimes it can feel good. There are cops who would have felt good about killing Theodore Bundy, or other serial rapists and murderers, and they would have felt good. So don't judge them, and when you have people that you care about get killed, as a human, you're capable of striking back and feeling good about it.
Well,
Good lesson, really.
Vietnam is kind of the center of a lot of conflict regarding civilian populations, and obviously you were talking about you were in the north fighting NVA.
Yeah.
Were there atrocities on both sides with civilians that you
Oh.
experienced?
Well, that's the reason why Sergeant Min was like he was. The atrocities, they would cut, you know, not to my guys, but other units. There were Americans who were killed, their testicles were cut off and put in their mouths. The civilians, they rounded up young boys or men out of the hamlets and villages and told them, you either go with us or we're going to kill your family. You know, and in cases where that didn't go well, they would slaughter families and put their heads on stakes. And, you know, I didn't have to deal with that stuff, but I know particularly guys in 1st Marine Division, and it made it a much worse war experience. I'm very, very glad I didn't have to deal with some of the stuff, that they had to deal with.
Can you talk a little bit about like the dehumanization of the Vietnamese, such as gooks, dinks, things like that?
Yeah, my cousins tried to nail me on this because I was calling them gooks, and they said, well, why do you call the Vietnamese gooks? I said, I don't call the Vietnamese gooks. I call the communist gooks. Because those were the enemy. I would never call a South Vietnamese a gook. And that's like calling a Japanese a Jap, you know.
Mm-hmm.
That was a pejorative term. That's not a compliment to be called a Jap by a World War II veteran.
Right.
You know, and they committed unbelievable atrocities, and Americans knew about that, and we were very good at killing them. You know, I've talked to those guys. They get very good at it. In the same way, All the Way to Berlin is a fabulous book by an 82nd Airborne Army officer who went all the way to Berlin. And he talked about becoming very good about killing Jerries. Not Germans, Jerries,
Right.
Nazis.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it's a dehumanization at all. I think it is a way to help you kill an enemy and not feel like you killed a Vietnamese.
Mm-hmm.
You know, who was it? Eisenhower hated war. I just came from that museum, which is phenomenal up there in Abilene, Kansas. But he hated the Nazis worse. And that was a good cause. It's a good thing he did.
Absolutely.
You know, or we'd all be speaking German and Japanese right now.
So it seems to me that some of these questions might be irrelevant. So you said that landmines weren't as much as a problem for you. Snipers,
Yeah,
punji
we had
sticks.
them. We had both, but we didn't have them like they did down south,
I
south
see.
of Da Nang. If you were north of Da Nang, it was a different war in a lot of ways. You know, we had some casualties from both. Well, Bliss was killed by a sniper shot in the back.
Mhm.
You know, the radio operator from Oklahoma City I lost was shot in the back by a VC woman on a roof. And that was when I was in Sydney on R&R, which made it even worse for me. You know.
Well, you mentioned R&R. Was there anything particularly fun while you're in Vietnam? I know that's probably a kind of a simplistic question, but
The only pleasure in Vietnam, the reason I started smoking, was they gave you 4 cigarettes in every C ration. And that was the only pleasure in Vietnam, so that's why I started smoking again. And that's what made R&R so special. You went from hell to heaven. Made it easy to fall in love, you know. And but the R&Rs were phenomenal, but it was hard to, sometimes it was hard to go back. You have Sergeant Mike was the cartoon of Vietnam in the Stars and Stripes and everything.
okay.
My favorite one was it's at R&R Center. You got a guy at the desk checking people in for R&R, and you got a soldier standing in front of him. He hasn't shaven, his eyes are like this. You know, he's just barely standing. He's so exhausted. And the desk sergeant looks up at him and says, "Are you going on R&R, or did you just get back?" Either way, you were exhausted.
Right. Well, is there anything you wanted to talk about from your first deployment that we haven't discussed yet that was something perhaps on your mind before we talk about your volunteering for the second tour?
Can't think of anything.
What was it like? Did you go back stateside after your first tour?
Yeah, I wanted to go to Europe, But because I'd been wounded, and my parents were so upset, they said, because you got to go anywhere in the free world for 30 days on this special, if you extend it. It was an unbelievable offer. Plus you got another leave and another R&R in the next 6 months. So, but I knew Mom was, you know, in bad shape. She had to, they don't believe what you tell them, you know. They have to see you before they know you're okay. So I came back to the States, and we met in we met up in Minneapolis, all of us, and we went to a camp up there and fished. My dad and I fished all the time together. We grew up fishing and hunting with my dad. And it's ironic because it's right now exactly 45 years, I guess, is that right? Yeah, because of the lunar landing. Neil Armstrong, we watched him step down on the moon from that cabin in Minnesota while we were in the fishing resort.
Interesting. Log
cabins, yeah. So of course, never forget that. Then I went to D.C. for 5 days, saw a girlfriend. There's my aunt and uncle primarily, but I did see a gal I had dated briefly. But my aunt and uncle had been they'd been my second family, and they lived in Alexandria, Virginia. Then I came home here for 5 days, went to California for a week and saw buddies out there. Gary Busey, the actor, was my pledge son here in college in Sigma Chi fraternity. And they were out there in a band. The house band, the rubber band, was trying to make it in Hollywood. And so they were living out there, and I got together with all of them. Then I went back. Went to Okinawa first, again, a few days, then flew in country and got blown out of my rack the first night there, you know. And after that, it was all working with civilians, and I already knew those people because I'd been there 6 months the year before I went up north. And so like there was one old Papasan that I got to know because when I was a lieutenant down in Da Nang, platoon commander, we did a sweep through their village, and I had some city guys in my big city Philly kids or something in my platoon, and he had this cow, beautiful cow, and it panicked and it didn't like the smell of Marines, and it ran through the lines, and this guy panicked and he shot it. Well, so it had a bullet hole inside, but it was doing okay. So you have to compensate. If you make mistakes like that, you have to compensate. So I was taking the Air Force veterinarian from Da Nang Air Base, a major out there regularly, and he was treating this wound. And it was very funny. He said, I'll go, but only if you have a Marine patrol. I'm not going out in the village unless you have a patrol to protect me. So no problem. So we were going out there regularly, and it abscessed, and he cut all that out, and then he would bandage it, and the cow lived. And I was skeptical because the cow's always pregnant when he gets shot, right? Because then you have to give him more money to compensate. Well, I was skeptical. It wasn't. It wasn't a lie. And pretty soon, you know, a month or two, whatever it was, this beautiful little baby bull comes out, you know. And so by then, we had developed a great relationship. He had 5 sons. They were all serving in the National Police, Popular Force, or ARVNs. They were all 5 serving South Vietnam, fighting communism. So see, that's why I was so committed to these people. You know, they were fighting for their lives, for their freedom, to not live in communism.
Well, I have a few questions before we get into that.
Yeah.
You mentioned your father, your family, your mother, some uncles, some aunts, and your friends. So you got to see a lot of acquaintances whenever you came back home. Yeah. How had your relationships evolved? Had you changed? Did you notice it? How did they treat you? Was it the same?
They were just so thankful to see me, you know, that I didn't notice it after my first tour. After my second tour, I did. They've all changed. And of course, that's because I had changed.
Right.
It made everybody else seem like they had changed, but they hadn't changed. Although the country had changed tremendously. Going to a movie in '67 and going to a movie in 1970 was like, you got to be kidding me. You know, sort of like in the '60s, somebody said when the country went to hell and most of us went along with it, the change in morality and values, and I think a lot of it was just drugs and the shock, the turmoil of Vietnam and everything. But, you know, you had full frontal nudity in the movies. And so Richard Harris running around, you know, naked in a movie. And that was very shocking, you know, to see that change. It had a profound impact on us. You know, Kennedy's assassination, the assassinations did. It was all part and parcel, you know. If Kennedy had not been assassinated, this country would be different today than it is. I really believe that. That was the crucial one of the three.
And my other question is, and you might have just answered this question, was why did you volunteer? Why did you extend?
I extended because I was committed. We had a famous Marine general who was, you got to win the hearts and minds of the people while you're fighting the war.
Right.
Well, that was my commitment, so I worked a lot with civilians, both my first tour and my second tour in the Da Nang area. And I loved them. Vietnamese people are wonderful people. I was invited to go to their dinners and their festivals, and my boy's favorite story is the village chief invited me to a big festival dance. The kids are dancing and everything. And in this big dinner, it's a table 2.5 times longer than this, about this wide, and Vietnamese, all Vietnamese but me, and food, just the whole thing. And in their culture, if they offer you food and you turn it down, that's an insult.
Mm-hmm.
They eat strange things. And so the village chief and I had become very close, and he was number 1 on the VC hit list, so he couldn't even sleep with his family. He had to sleep in an armed compound so they wouldn't kill him at night. And I'd vote for that guy for mayor of New York City or any place else. He was a phenomenal man. But he invited me, and I said, before we went to eat, I said, okay, but I said, one thing, I said, I don't eat liver, okay? He says, okay, no liver. You don't have to eat liver. So I didn't want to insult him, have him offer me liver and not eat it. So that meant I ate duck embryo and pork stomach and, you know, everything else. Well, they had these little bowls spaced along the table, and there's this pepper that big, tiny little green pepper. And these guys, you know, they're chopsticks. They're just, you know, it's just a big mass feeding, and you grab this, put it on, you eat that, and every few minutes they grab one of those little peppers, throw it in their mouth, and you just keep right on eating, you know. So finally they say, Trung Nguyen, which is first lieutenant in Vietnamese, Trung Nguyen, you try. You know, he pointed at the peppers. You know, and I said, okay. So I get this thing, I bite into it, and I know in a nanosecond, this is one of the biggest mistakes I've ever made in my life. Everyone stopped, they're all watching the Trung Nguyen eat this pepper, because they know, I think. Anyway, so I take a couple bites, and I swallow this thing. I can feel it going down, like it's Alka-Seltzer or something, going down. I can feel it all the way down there. I feel it. I can feel it when it gets to my stomach. And it sits there and it starts doing more and more and more. I'm trying to hold on and see their places are all open. So this is the street right behind us, you know. And finally, I mean, it's Vesuvius. It's coming. Yeah. Whether there's nothing I can do. And they're all watching, you know. And so I just stepped up over the bench there. I went to the middle of the road, like that, you know. I came back, and I sat down the village chief, all of them there, slapping me on the, Trung Nguyen, you're number 1. You're number 1, Trung Nguyen. I mean, it made their day. And if any of them are still alive, they probably still remember the day that Trung Nguyen ate incredible. I mean, hot doesn't describe it. I have no idea what it was, but I've never seen anything like it.
So what were some of the greatest rewards of working with the civilian populations?
Well, the fact that you could help them, like this farmer with the 5 guys that were all fighting. We shot his cow, you know. America developed special crops for Vietnam to help them agriculturally. They developed a leafy green vegetable type of crop that you could plant and harvest and take to market in 30 days. That's what they needed. They needed to be able to harvest and take it to market to make a living. And so this guy was great. You know, we had the instructions, Vietnamese, followed it to a T, had a great garden. He'd take that stuff in. We also developed what was called IR8 rice, which is a typhoon type resistant rice. And so it could withstand the monsoons, the tough weather, and still produce a good rice crop. So that was a space. So I would go around and introduce this to the farmers and get them to plant it and stuff, and help them out. Then we would build, help rebuild schools, dispensaries, things like that. So, and I had Marines who loved being out there with the Vietnamese, you know. So it was a great experience. There was always the danger, you know, but you just got used to that. You adjusted to that, and so much so that when I came back and got into the FBI and I didn't fasten my seatbelt when I was driving their cars, and people would say, "Why don't you fasten your seatbelt?" And I said, "Well, I get nervous when I feel like my life's not in danger." See, that's the adjustment I had made over 2 tours, was that if your life's in danger, that's normal. If it's not in danger, it's not normal. So it seemed abnormal.
Wow.
And yeah, I mean, I got over it, obviously, but you adapt, you know, to your environment, and you get used to war to a certain extent, although it takes a lot out of you.
What was the danger factor while you were working with civilians?
Not very high. Not very high. I was always armed. You know, I was always armed. But we were in a pacified area of people who wanted to be there, who wanted to be by us. And like I said, the kids would tell us. Right. If there was danger, the kids would tell us. So,
and were there episodes where GIs or Marines would sell candy to the kids, or
we didn't
buy?
sell it.
I meant buy things from the kids and then give them.
Well, the kids didn't have stuff to sell.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you'd see the booths along Dogpatch City there. It's all black market stuff, you know, that had been stolen, the pop and candy and all that. That was for sale. But yeah, the guys would always take little snacks out and stuff and give to the kids, you know, gum, candy. But yeah, the kids, they didn't have anything to sell.
Right.
Yeah.
I've read accounts where little Vietnamese children would be hustling cigarettes and beer on the side of the road. But
well, if you gave it to them, they would take it to somebody who could make a little money out of it.
Right.
You know.
Okay.
But yeah, well, we didn't have beer. You know, like again, my belief is that our beer and sodas were all stolen and diverted to the black market. And especially up in 3rd Marine Division, you were supposed to get a beer ration of 2 beers a day. You got to be kidding me. You know, if you got 2 in 3 months, you were doing good.
Interesting.
So that all went somewhere. And I told you about Sergeant Min and how he would never even criticize anybody. Well, I had another interpreter named Sergeant On, and I suspected Sergeant On was involved in the black market. You know, not a capital offense, but not good.
Right.
You know, and so one day I said, Sergeant Min, is Sergeant On involved in the black market? And Sergeant Min looked at me and he says, well, it's not for me to say. He would not criticize another human being.
Right.
But I knew he was involved in it, or he would have said no.
You mentioned a a battle-earned respect for the NVA to a certain extent.
Absolutely.
What was the feelings, the relationship between the Marine Corps, the not the NVA, but the ARVN and Vietnamese Special Forces, like the Rangers that you had mentioned? What was it like?
It was either the 37th or the 21st Ranger Battalion that stayed at Quai Son with the 26th Marines.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a very tight relationship there, and they were very professional.
Mm-hmm.
I knew when my platoon was with that Ranger Battalion, we didn't have to worry about them doing their job, and they didn't have to worry about us doing our job. That they were proficient and battle-hardened veterans, very professional. So didn't deal a whole lot with the ARVNs or the Popular Force people where I was. Again, 1st Marine Division down south would have a lot more of that.
And you mentioned the Montagnards. Montagnards, okay. I wasn't sure how to pronounce that.
Yeah.
Did you have working relationships with those?
Well, the Montagnards were down in like 3 Corps in the Highlands. Mm-hmm. We were in I Corps up north. But there were some Montagnards in the Ashaw Valley where we were that had been co-opted. Now, all of these Montagnards down here were all pro-American, pro-South Vietnam. And they were all mercilessly, the ones who didn't get away were slaughtered by the NVA when Vietnam fell in 75. Mm-hmm. That's why we have a lot of Montagnards in the United States. Right. Did you see Gran Torino?
Right.
Those are Montagnards.
Right.
Those are Montagnards, yeah. And there's lots of them. In Minnesota, there's lots of them. The ones that VC'd us up in the Ashaw Valley were only Montagnards because there had been 2 NVA divisions in there, and it was either do or die. So they were co-opted. They were forced to do that. And I was disappointed in that, but who wouldn't do the same thing? If you want to live.
Right. What years was your second deployment working with civilians?
I went back over there in August of '69 until February of '70.
So this is during the process of Vietnamization.
Oh yeah, the whole
of it.
Yeah, supposedly that was what was going on all along, and we were in good shape until the 73 offensive. I mean, we were gone. 73 offensive, the South Vietnamese did real well. Mm-hmm. And Congress then decided not to fund them to resupply them, and it totally scuttled their effort. They had no chance. Mm-hmm. No chance. Personally, for me, it's the worst thing this country ever did in my lifetime, was to win the hearts and minds of those people, promise them the support, and then to scuttle the budget and not provide them with the supplies and monies they needed for bullets, beans, and Band-Aids, as we say. Mm-hmm. And I will never forgive my country for doing that. That's the worst part of the whole thing for me, the whole experience right there. I didn't get depressed in Vietnam. In '75, when Saigon fell, I got very angry, and there were a bunch of us who said, send us back over there, right? We're not going to let this go down for nothing. All those guys, we're not going to let all our colleagues and friends die for nothing. And we meant it. We'd have gone back. In '85, they did it so much, that's all they talked about on TV, the fall of Saigon. They showed it for a month, all in April. I got depressed, and I went into the Vietnam Veterans Outreach Program in Fredericksburg, Virginia, and got help there. But that was the traumatic part for me, the most traumatic part for me, not the fighting. It was, when you have a mother who writes you and tells you her story about being Ukrainian and enslaved by the Nazis, and her son is killed, and a third of her died, but she knows the price of freedom, that's very sustaining for doing what you have to do to preserve freedom. And I felt like that's what we were doing for the South Vietnamese. I thought they were fabulous people, wonderful. They have the cutest kids in the entire world. And the part we haven't talked about was one of my jobs as a civil affairs officer. We had 3 orphanages in Da Nang, and we worked primarily with the Sacred Heart Orphanage. And one of my jobs was the Marines who wanted to adopt Vietnamese orphans, I would facilitate that, set that up, help them with the paperwork so they could adopt these kids.
Wow.
And that was critical work because you could walk into a very large room. It would be full of babies in cribs. I mean, completely full of babies in cribs. There'd be 3 nuns in there with 80 babies.
Wow.
Just broke your heart, you know. And we would throw parties for them at the orphanage and bring the Marine band. The 1st Marine Air Wing had their band there.
Wow.
We'd have hot dogs and ice cream, and I have pictures of that, you know. And I had one of the big debates I had before I left was, should I adopt one of these kids? And I was too idealistic. I decided you have to have a mother and a father. I'm single. I can't be a mother and a father, so I'm not going to do it. Well, again, the regret, when Saigon fell, it was like I could have had one of those kids out of there. It was very much like Schindler's List.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, was there anything? How did you entertain yourself while you were in Vietnam, if you did, besides R&R?
Well, entertainment wasn't very high on the list. When you're back in the Da Nang area, you had some USO shows, and those were huge. Those were huge. Mostly Australian, Filipinos, Korean, more so than American. But I did see Bob Hope Christmas. Before I went on R&R in Christmas '68, he came to Da Nang, and I did get to see Bob Hope and Stella Stevens, and that, again, very sustaining, very rejuvenating, sustaining. And, you know, he would always bring beautiful women with him, and she'd come out on stage, and he said, I just brought her along to remind you guys what you're fighting for, you know, stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the morale of your men in the field? It seems that you always kept a strong Marine mentality, but what about your men in the field?
Yeah, I would say they would all agree with you. We had a great camaraderie, morale, and that's backed up by the fact that we did a number of Gulf Company 2nd Battalion 9th Marines reunions. Even the Canadian, I had hosted one in British Columbia. And we had a great reunion up there, and unfortunately he smoked himself to death. He's gone now, but you know, we've maintained contact with each other. And one of my radio operators came back and went back to West Virginia, the hills of West Virginia, and had a career in a coal mine, and has severe post-traumatic stress disorder. But I was very relieved to find out it wasn't. For when I was there, the events that have haunted him forever were before he and I knew each other, before I was the company commander. And but I did stop by there on the way back from my wife's funeral at Arlington, and I found his house in Del Barton, West Virginia. This is in a hollow. The final road is tracks over the grass. But he has a real nice log cabin he's built there. But I didn't tell him I was coming because his VA counselor, I totally disagree with this, but a couple of guys have been told this by their counselors: do not have any contact. It'll make it worse with your old buddies and stuff. And I think that's the worst medicine possible. But that's why I didn't call him and tell him. And I knocked on his door, and he came to the door, and he's bald now, so I had to look at him, make sure it was him. And he didn't have his shirt on. He got a big scar on his shoulder. And I said, I'm a voice from your past. And he just looked at me. And I said, think radios. Well, I think he went commercial radio, and he still didn't get it. And I said, I'm Jim Horn. He's like this. Big bear hug, you know. Tears. And we had a great visit, and I took him and his wife out to eat. And in Del Barton, West Virginia, that's a sandwich, just a nothing sandwich. You know, there's nothing there but a coal mine. And But after all those years, you know, it was a bear hug.
Right.
So, for the most part, with very few exceptions, there were a couple of guys that I nailed on fitness reports because they weren't good. You know, they weren't doing their job. There was some bitterness about that. But
did you ever have a fear of fraggings or?
I never did, you know, because for one thing, where you are up north, if you fragged an officer up there, you'd be weakening your ability to fight.
Right.
I mean, if you frag your leaders, then who's going to step up and lead?
And I suspect that drug use and alcohol was less prevalent in the field than it was back in the bases.
Wasn't up there at all. There would be peer pressure. The only time I ever even caught a whiff of marijuana was in our rear, which was in Quang Tri, and that's where the company offices were and stuff like that. And one night I was walking through there, I smelled it, but it was non-existent where we were. Our base was called Vandergrift Combat Base, and you're way up north, and it wasn't up there. And to use it, if I used it, I'd jeopardize your life.
Right.
You didn't want me using it. There was a lot of peer pressure. So we just didn't, again, if you go down to the consolidated areas where there's heavy density of troops and stuff like that, although at Da Nang we didn't have a problem with that in our battalion. And I think Marines were a lot better disciplined in that respect. And they knew they might have to be fighting, and in the rear they'd get their beer, you know. And we had an Indian who was unbelievable. He was a warrior, you know. In a firefight, watch out. He was a real warrior. But in the rear he was terrible because he'd get drunk all the time, you know. So somebody had to, and of course, nicknamed Chief, you know. But he was a great Marine, as a true fighting Marine, none better. But he always get in trouble in the rear because he'd get drunk. He couldn't, you know, they just can't do alcohol. You know, they don't metabolize it well.
Would you describe the men under you as working class?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I had a sergeant who had a couple of years of college. His name's Sergeant George from Detroit. I've never been able to find him. I'd love to find him, but his IQ was up there, you know, and he was a great leader. And a very personable guy, very professional guy. He sold me right off the bat. When we had to go secure the bridge south of the Da Nang that had been taken over, you know, and won back. When I got there, I was told that a Marine had been shot off of the bridge 3 days earlier, and they hadn't found him. And the one thing you have to do for families is you've got to give them back their son. You have to do that, because if you don't, for the rest of their lives, every time the phone rings, the doorbell rings, they're going to be hoping. You know, so if they're killed, you have to give them back. And so I spread the word to the kids. There's a dead Marine around here, you know, we're looking for a dead Marine. And sure enough, you know, the next day, when a 10-year-old kid comes up, he says, I find Marine, I show you. You know, and you're worried about the possibility of, you know, a trap and an ambush, because those kids can be told, I'm going to kill your family if you don't do this. Right. So we were careful, but he took us right to the body, still in the water. This is tropical weather, 3 days in the water. You're bloated, the smell is horrible. Didn't even look like an American, looked like a Mongoloid. And but we had to drag him through the water to get him to the boat. And I grabbed him, we had him on his back, and I grabbed him under his arms. Sergeant George grabbed his boots, and we started dragging him over the boat. Well, this is the first dead Marine I had handled. And plus, it was really ripe. You know, it was in bad shape. And so on the way to the boat, fortunately, I had not eaten. so I didn't have anything to throw up, but I dry heaved half of the way there to the boat. Well, when you're the new lieutenant, you know, you're a lieutenant and you got a platoon and you throw up, then what you're worried about is he's going to go back and tell the whole platoon, and then you're going to be the laughing stock of the platoon, you know. Because this wasn't one of our guys. He was actually part of 3rd MPs, and he didn't say a word. Not a word. He understood. He respected it. There was nothing wrong with it. And that kind of saved my reputation because, you know, it was appropriate. It was totally appropriate. But, you know, in gallows humor, you might want to make fun of somebody for doing that, you know. And it didn't happen. So I always appreciated him for that and everything else. He was very, very squared away.
Absolutely. So how aware were you and your fellow Marines of the social unrest back home while you were in the field?
Not too much. Not too much. You didn't get the news, you know. There was no news. So the only thing I would get is some article sometimes from home that my mother would send me. So
were you caught off guard at all whenever you came home from your second tour?
Oh, you heard about it when you were in the rear. You knew, but you didn't hear about it on a regular basis. Wasn't your concern, you know, over there.
Can you talk a little bit about your hat that says above it all?
Yeah, this is my basic school class, officers basic school, 5-68 Echo Company. The winter we went through our 22-week course at Quantico, Virginia, at the Marine Corps base, was the coldest winter in 40 years. So we kind of nicknamed ourselves Eskimo Company instead of Echo Company. But we also have reunions. And this was from one of the reunions. But our motto when we were back there, because of the controversy of the war and everything, was that we were above it all. So above it all was our motto. And the guy that had the caps made, the hats made, and covers for the reunion had that put on there. So it's one of my favorite hats. Above it all. And I've got other friends who say, yeah, I like that. That's a good slogan for handling adversity. You just be above it. You know, you make decisions with your mind whether you're going to be a victim or a survivor, and those decisions kind of lead you that way. You know, I did workshops for 9.5 years for the responders and survivors and victims of the Oklahoma City bombing.
Wow.
And because I used to run the trauma program for the whole FBI from 87 to 94, and I had the expertise. Moved back here 7 months before the bomb went off. But, you know, I used a lot of this stuff that you're never going to be normal again, the normal you knew. But you will find a new normal if you make the right decisions. This new normal can be a good normal. If you make the wrong decisions, the new normal may be really bad. So, you know, there's a lot of cognitive stuff, a lot of things, lessons learned, and ideas, and give meaning. There were a lot of deaths there, and I worked with a lot of survivors who people around them died, their friends died, and they were having a real time accepting the fact that they didn't die too, survivor's guilt. And I told them that for those people that I worked at that were like that, I said, you know, when I came back from Vietnam, I had to figure out how to cope with all these losses, my friends and men. And one day I was thinking, I said, gosh, you know, I know a lot of guys who would give everything they ever known to have one more day, and they'll never get that chance. So if I want to wake up in the morning and slough it off and do nothing, then that's okay for me, but I owe it to them. I owe it to them to do something positive, to make something out of this day, not to waste it, because you got to do it for them, because that's what they want you to do. And that was pretty effective with the Oklahoma City bombing survivors. I also did workshops for Pentagon and World Trade Center survivors and responders. Same thing, you know. It's about overcoming adversity, overcoming trauma, And we gave a lot of those people their lives back. You can process that stuff, but you either process it or it processes you. And with the right kind of help, you can overcome just about anything you'd ever experience in life. And I have plenty of friends who've done it, who've been through a lot more than I've ever been through. And they keep me going, and they kept me going and inspired me because I have some numbness and some incapacities in my feet and like circulation and stuff. But I know people who are paralyzed, who have no use of their legs. And the good thing is it keeps you from feeling sorry for yourself. Because if you feel sorry for yourself, you're just going to go downhill. You're going to wallow in self-pity and go downhill.
How did you readjust to peaceful society after your 2 tours in Vietnam?
Well, my when I came back, they had 3. I was assigned to 29 Palms, California, Marine Corps base. They had 3 billets open, and I was interested in one of them. It was operations and training officers for the MPs. And if you're an infantry officer, our biggest problem going to Vietnam was, what do you do after you've been to the moon? I mean, that is such an unbelievable experience. It's way up there. Not that it's all a positive experience, but a lot of it was. A great deal of it was very positive. Even being in the bush for 6 months, you're camping out. And if you didn't get hit that night, it was another camp out, with a bunch of guys, And so there were a lot of positives, but a lot of us went into law enforcement and firefighters because, in a sense, you may be a little bit of an adrenaline junkie. Like I said, I get uncomfortable if I feel like my life's not in danger. So if I go into law enforcement, I can feel like my life's in danger. And so I did that for over 25 years and had some tough losses and experiences there too. But that was the right thing for me to go into,
What were your thoughts of demonstrations against the war? Did you ever experience demonstrations personally?
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah. Extreme animus for me. If you carry a North Vietnamese or a VC flag in America and you're marching around in a demonstration, that's no different than during World War II if you carried a Nazi flag and walked around, in a demonstration. For my generation, for me personally. And my brother was a professor at UT Austin, and my Aussie girlfriend and I went down to visit. She came for a month, and we went down to see them in March of 1970. UT Austin, they have a big ellipse. And I happened to be there when they had a demonstration of 10,000 people, anti-war demonstration. Problem with college kids is it's too much of a happening. Well, let's go to the demonstration. So they're almost doing the Cotton Eye Joe around this thing. They're having a party. They're going around, they were going this way. And this guy comes by, and he's painted a VC flag on a placard that he's holding, on a pole. And he walks through there, and my blood pressure went through the roof. And to me, that's the enemy. You're carrying the enemy's flag. And so they kept going. It's a big ellipse, so it was probably 15 minutes later, 20 minutes later, maybe, he came around again. I'm standing there with my brother, and I said, watch this. So I waded through the crowd up to him, and I put my mouth in his ear, and I said, "You scum!" And he froze. I mean, he literally didn't move. His feet froze, his hand, and he just got this incredible blank look on his face of bewilderment. I'm here at this party, everybody's having fun. And he looks at me, and he looks at that. I know he made the connection. And he looked back at me, and he looked just like the zombies on TV, the dead, Walking Dead. That's the way he walked away. And I had to do that. I did that for all the people who died and for our cause, and I'm sure if he's still alive, he remembers that moment to this day. I'm quite sure.
Sure it does.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the media's portrayal of Vietnam, such as films, Platoon, for example?
Yeah. Did you say portrayal or betrayal?
You
Did
tell
you
me.
say betrayal?
I said portrayal.
Portrayal. See, I heard betrayal, and that's to me what it was. So much so, I even before he died, the famous broadcaster from Texas,
Cronkite?
yeah, Walter Cronkite, I wrote him a letter holding him responsible because he said we can't. He really decided to go political and decision making instead of just reporting, and when you have that stuff inside of you, you want to express it. So I didn't get a response, but that's okay. I expressed it, and I think the portrayal was atrociously biased. The good we did over there, the cause. They portrayed the Vietnamese as not caring. They didn't really want us over there. They didn't care if they're free or not. And my chief interpreter, they walked 380 miles from Hanoi to Dalat to live in a free country. My secretary's from Saigon, and her whole life was centered around this thing. The 53 people that worked for me when I went back, the civil affairs officer, Vietnamese, don't tell me those people didn't care or didn't want to live in a free country, because I knew them. I knew what it meant to them. So there's some famous person who said a quote once about it's a good thing to fight for your freedom. It's even better to fight for somebody else's. And there were people who fought for our freedom in this country from the British that made the difference. And so I still to this day consider myself to be a freedom fighter. I refuse to be labeled anything else other than that. I was fortunate to come back to Stillwater, Oklahoma, which was still flag-waving Bible Belt. And not once, anywhere, ever, did I ever get a smirk, a bad comment, spit at by anyone when I came back from Vietnam, even when I was in uniform traveling. So I didn't have the experience that a lot of my colleagues did. But I've heard those testimonies. I've sat there and listened to testimonies in D.C. of some of these guys, what they came home to, and it's beyond belief.
So you reintegrated back into your hometown.
Well, just for a visit.
Okay.
Yeah.
How did, we mentioned about the family. How did you feel that your family had changed, or you had changed?
Well, I realized it had to be me.
Yeah.
Because they all seemed different.
In what way?
Well, it's hard to describe, but you're looking at life and them and the world through a different lens. And that's basically it. I'd also been warned about that by a guy in Okinawa, a vet who'd already come out of Vietnam, that he thought his family had changed. They'd all changed, but he didn't realize yet it was him that had changed. But yeah, I came back. I was only here for a month. I was waiting to hear about whether or not I got hired by the FBI.
Tell me about that. How did you get into the FBI?
Yeah.
What was the process?
Yeah. When I came back to 29 Palms, my assignment in February of 70, I had that option of becoming the operations and training officer for the MPs, so I selected that. And one of my duties was I was the liaison for the two agents who were in nearby Palm Springs, 45 miles away, who had to cover all the investigations on the Marine Corps base. It's a huge base. So anytime they would come, we would get together and take them to the O Club and eat. And I played some golf with them, and we became good friends. And they actually recruited me into the FBI, and it was a godsend for me, because the unemployment rate in Southern California in 1970 was 12%, because you had so many thousands of people getting out of the military without jobs.
And inflation. Too.
Yeah, and we all liked Southern California. I wanted to live around San Diego. It's so, as my friend out there says, sunny and 70 every day.
Right.
But there was no jobs. And so I took the job because it was the best thing available for me at the time.
Absolutely. And you went to the FBI from there?
Yeah, a little over 25 years. Had some great assignments. I was in Seattle first office. I'd have never left Seattle had it not been the transfer policy they had. But I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. And then I was in Denver for 11 years. So I skied all the time and met my wife there, and we got married and started our family, and then got transferred to the FBI Academy in '83, and I was there till '94. We had our second boy in '84, and so we moved. It was actually my wife's choice to move to Stillwater in '94, and there was an opening here, and we took it, and so right back here in Stillwater, America, and making up for lost time and all the cowboy games that I missed, sporting events.
You mentioned the Oklahoma City bombing. Were there other national events during your time in the FBI that you cared to comment on that you participated in?
Oh yeah. Well, I was responsible for responding to or setting up the responses for all the traumas in the FBI, the whole FBI. So, I worked Hurricane Andrew, I worked the Loma Prieta and Northridge earthquakes in California, I worked suicides and family shootings, you name it, aircraft accidents. So I did that for 7 years. And one of the reasons we decided to move to Oklahoma was to come here where nothing ever happens. And 7 months after we got here, the bomb went off. And it drew me right back into that work. That's actually why I retired when I did from the FBI, because the FBI said, you have cases to work, and there was no expertise here. Oklahoma was not prepared. Nobody knew how to run these workshops, how to help people process their experiences. They were sending people all the way to Massachusetts to get this help,
Wow.
which was costing a fortune. So the chaplains, police chaplains, raised donated funds, and so we ran those workshops for 9.5 years. Didn't cost the participants a penny. They'd have lodging and food and tremendous help. The process works. I know how to do it. I did it for 7 years for the FBI before I came here. So it was sort of like training and God putting me in this place, and say this is what you need to do now. It was not easy.
What advice would you give to returning veterans from the Iraq and the Afghanistan wars today to help cope with their experiences?
Stay in touch with your buddies and go through the counseling process. Even if you think there's absolutely nothing wrong, you have nothing to lose by being honest, and that's the key here. You must not keep secrets. If you have secrets, if there's things you don't feel good about, those are the things that can haunt you the most, So make sure that you find that counselor or that person you can be totally honest with and purge it, get rid of it, because it'll eat you alive from the inside if you don't. And we're seeing that, I think, in our suicide rates of our veterans. That I have no doubts that's the reason it's happening, because they're sitting on it and they're stewing in their own juices, and you get to that point of no return. The most dangerous time for suicides, and I still remember this from a VA counselor in Albuquerque explaining to me when it was happening. It was when they lost a relationship. So divorce times, loss, death in the family, somebody close, but particularly I think divorce, losing a relationship, death of a loved one can be a very dangerous time for a vet who's suffering post-traumatic reactions.
Absolutely. Personally, did your war experience have any adverse effects on your family life or your social life that you can speak
No,
of?
because I didn't have a family then. I didn't marry until I was 33 years old.
Oh, okay.
So that's a long time afterward. I would say the oak bomb, as we called it, did. because that just freaked everybody out. We've been back here in Oklahoma 7 months, and my mom was freaked out. I was even going to Oklahoma City every day to work the bombing, and like it's still dangerous or something, but they didn't understand. I thought my kids were doing okay until my then 10-year-old, my wife told me that he didn't sleep all night one night. Well, he was one of these kids he's out. Never had trouble sleeping. So I knew it was having an impact on him,
From the bombing?
Yeah. That it just, it was a very scary, spooky thing. The deaths of 19 babies, little children, babies, nobody could fathom, could grasp how anybody could do that. And then you have a guy who's less than an animal whose response, Timothy McVeigh's response to that was, the daycare center was a public relations nightmare for him. Public relations nightmare. That's the way he viewed the death of 19 babies, which shows you how screwed up he was. So, yeah.
Throughout your life, you've witnessed some of America's most traumatic events nationally.
Mm-hmm.
The Vietnam War, the assassinations of Martin Luther King, John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy. What are the greatest and the worst aspects of humanity that you personally experienced?
Well, when you respond to disasters, what we always say is you will see the best of humanity and you will see the worst. When in Andrew, they're selling bags of ice for $8 a bag. And back then, a bag of ice was less than $1. Mm-hmm. When you see him selling generators for thousands, or when you see in those horrible circumstances where it's just obliterated. That the way I described Andrew was if you take a real bad Oklahoma tornado and multiply it by 1,000, that's what we saw. When we got there, we flew all the way across the state looking at this swath of destruction that went all the way across Florida. It was totally, your mind had a very, very hard time believing what it was seeing. So the wonderful things that people do are very uplifting. Oklahoma City, after the bombing, they said, we need blood. People drove there and got in line to give blood. There was a line of cars 2 miles long.
Wow.
They stayed. And I said, that's when I realized, these people don't want to help. They have to help. They would rather be here sitting in their car 2 mile long waiting to give blood than be at home watching this on TV. So that's the joy of a disaster, is you see people do selfless things that you never see them do any other time. But on the other hand, what I always told them was, you gotta focus on these people, mm-hmm. not on the, because if you do this, you're going to get angry and do something you regret. One of our guys had been through a hurricane in Charleston, and 3 years after the fact, we finally went back to Charleston. Nobody had really ever done anything for them. And he was on our Hurricane Andrew team, and he was telling us in his neighborhood, the first thing he had to do was the trees were all down, the roads were all blocked, and they didn't have power, but they had chainsaws. So they went out and the neighbors all got together, they started cutting these trees up and opening their road, access for emergency vehicles and everything else. And he said everybody did that but one neighbor. And he said this one guy just watched, didn't lift a finger, didn't help. And after some time out there doing this, he came out, he says, I wonder, you guys, these won't fit in my fireplace. Would you mind cutting them this long instead of this long? And Bill said, for the first time I understood the movie, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I thought about how I would like to cut him into pieces. But he says, sometimes it's good to have someone to direct your anger at, but that's what you have to focus on the good. And oh my gosh, the good. I have so many hundreds of stories, the great stories from the survivors of the Oklahoma City bombing. Unbelievable stories of good and of unexplainable things that happened. Angels that appeared. A guy that appeared in everybody was covered with dust, cement dust. You couldn't tell. Sometimes you couldn't tell gender, but you couldn't tell race. I mean, they were cement. It looked like cement. The people that had been in the building, and these 3 ladies were up there, and this guy shows up, and he's spotless with a 3-piece suit, and they were trapped. But he says, "Follow me," and he shows them. He leads them through the debris to the west end stairway so that they can go down, and they pass him. They go and they get there and they turn around to say thank you, and he's not there. There's no one there.
Wow.
And that's only one of the stories I heard.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
You've mentioned your sons a couple of times,
Yeah.
and the fact that you would be delighted that they took interest in your participation in Vietnam. What would you tell your sons from your experience if you wanted them to learn one thing?
Well, I think I did one time. It was we were back here, and one time my older son Jason said, "We're trying to figure out why Dad is like he is." And I said, "Well, I can explain that to you in about 10 minutes if you want to know." But yeah, it affects you. I tried to. I saw a lot of veterans who had so much anger they took it all out on their family, and they were over authoritarian. And my kids, to some degree, may think I was, but I was nothing compared to those. And I always tried to, if anything, err on the side of not being overbearing, because I didn't want to let those experiences mold my fatherhood thing. I always told them that my dad had a drinking problem, and he was a great father in a lot of ways. A wonderful man when he wasn't drinking. He was a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde type, and he was bad when he was drinking. I said, my goal has been to be a better father to you than my dad was to me. And so I think I was. And if you make your goal to be a better father to your kids than I was to you, then it's just going to keep going up and getting better and better. That's the best you can hope for, probably.
Absolutely.
I'm glad they didn't go to war. I'm glad they didn't have the experience. They could have been hurt and killed, and that would have ruined our lives. I understand that a lot more as a parent than I did when I was, 22, 23,
Right.
going in.
Throughout the course of this interview, has there been anything that you wanted to discuss that I haven't asked?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head.
When history is...
I will say Oak Bomb had a much greater impact on me personally than Vietnam did, though. I'm an Oklahoman. It was done in Oklahoma. I was a federal employee. It was done against the federal building. It was done by Americans. And that's worse. That's worse than being attacked by outside enemies, to me. So it was, that had a much greater impact on me, and I'm sure it affected our family. I know my wife felt like it affected us, and...
you mentioned that your wife wanted to come back to Stillwater,
Yeah.
right? What's kept you in Stillwater? Why is Stillwater your home?
Well, it's actually been health issues more than anything else. I don't know that we would have stayed permanently, but then we came back here and took care of my mom. She was 92 when she died. Then we moved her dad out here after his wife died in California because he was going downhill. And so, we were, Nancy was the caretaker really for both my mom and her dad, and I really think that's what affected her immune system and made her vulnerable to the cancer that she got. But the parents both died, and then Nancy was diagnosed, and she was in treatment for 5.5 years. So there was no option. It's not the times when you pick up and move. So that kept us here more than anything else, until my younger son just got hired by OSU, and his wife by OSU. I have a fifth wheel. I was going to sell the house. 4-bedroom house for a person by himself, to me, doesn't work. I don't need that. And I was going to sell the house and be mobile and just waiting to see where Justin and Anna wound up. Then I could go from California for a while. And the good thing about an RV is you're not intruding. You can live in that and then just be with the family, but not be on top in their way and disrupt their life, as visitors do. But now that Justin and Anna are coming to Stillwater, I'm going to keep the house a while longer and the RV, and I think this will be something they can enjoy a lot. I can take it out to the lake and set it up, and they can, I would have loved to have had something like that when I was young with kids.
Absolutely.
And now they're gonna have it. It's not gonna cost them a penny. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to some good times. And it's a horrible adjustment when you lose your spouse. And so this gives me, this is going to help a lot for me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It seems that Oklahoma has a great. There's almost a dichotomy of a relationship with you in Oklahoma, with such a tragic sense of loss, and with a hope and aspiration for better times to come.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, this is a real godsend as far as I'm concerned. Getting hired here.
Absolutely. When history is recorded, what would you want to know from your experiences?
In regards to what?
Well, let's take it from, growing up in Oklahoma to Vietnam. We'll start with that.
Yeah. Well, Oklahoma was particularly Stillwater was a fabulous place to grow up. I love college towns. I'm very partial to them. There's too many advantages. Cultural, sports, everything, education, opportunities. Orientation toward education. You got a higher IQ. Payne County is in the top 50 in America for college graduates, percentage of adults living here. And so for Vietnam, I think I already told you already, from the historical perspective, it's the biggest disappointment in my life, what this country did in pulling out of Vietnam. And we stayed in Korea. Look at Korea. Look at what they've been able to do. And we had it. We were this close, and we let it go. And then, worst of all, we turned our backs on our allies. And many of those were very personal betrayals for me. So, yeah, that's something I won't get over or forget.
Have you been to the Vietnam War Memorial?
Oh, yeah.
All
the dedications, many times. When I was going to GW, I was going to night school, driving into D.C. from the academy after working all day. And it's funny that several times I had compulsions to go to the wall again. And every time I did, there was something there that was the reason I was drawn there.
Wow.
And the last time I couldn't find it, and I went over to the statue and found a placard there. Bless them, they gave all they had for their country. And there were 8 Marines listed in there, and the bottom one was Lieutenant Russell Ng, and he was a classmate of mine, and who was killed over there. And so I knew that's what I was supposed to see here. And yeah, I went to the dedication of the Women's Memorial and the dedication of the big one, and that's important to me. I even went over to Enid the other day they bought one of the traveling walls, and it's like a half-scale reproduction they've set permanently, and I took something over there and set it. on the wall that has most of my men. So, yeah, that's important. You have to keep, I don't want to forget. And they deserve to be remembered for the sacrifice they made. The sad thing is, they were great young men who would have made significant contributions, and they never got a chance to do that, and they never got a chance to get married, have kids, Although the one of my radio operators I lost, you'll like this story. He's my cousin in Tyler, Texas. He's a retired flight attendant. And I said, Maxie Jackson's buried in Tyler, I found out. Well, she found his grave. It's in a black cemetery on the north end of town. And I said, next time I come down there, I want to go to his grave. And so I went down there, and I knew his wife was supposed to still be alive, and then I found out she was working for the sheriff's office. I thought, oh, this is good. This could work. Sometimes families do not want to see you. You're opening old wounds. And with Bliss in York, PA, I tried, and his uncle said, whatever you do not contact his parents. So I didn't, But anyway, so I'm down there, and it's a Sunday, and I go to the sheriff's office, I think it's Bell County, and the desk sergeant's on duty there. And I show up, and I'm this white dude, and I'm looking for a black female deputy. And it's like, yeah, well, that's his response is, wait, what is this all about? And so I have to tell him about 3 times. Her husband was my company radio operator. He was killed in the hole with me. I have some very good things to tell her about her husband if she wants to get together, but I understand if she doesn't. Would you get this message to her? And he made me tell it 3 times, and which is okay. I understood. You should be protective of your deputies. And so anyway, I said, well, have her call me. I got my cell phone. And my cousin and I are going back to her home. About 20 minutes later, phone rings, and it's her. And she says, I'd love to see you. I'm on duty. I'm off duty job, but I'm in uniform. I'm working the county fair. So come to the fair. We'll get together over here. So I went over there and rendezvoused with her. And I knew, because she was law enforcement, this would make it a lot easier. We're going to hit it off. And I've got these great things to tell her about her husband, And so it's funny. She says, well, I need to be walking through here, so we'll walk through the fair, and so I can keep an eye on things, and we'll talk. So it's really funny because she's a little bit heavy set. She's in uniform. She's a black female in Tyler, Texas. And I've got my arm over her shoulder. She's got her arm around my waist. She's got her gun on and everything. And we're walking through the fair. And I'm telling you, the looks, the blacks, the whites, everybody is in. I mean, this isn't a match, and they know it, but they don't know the connection. And that was my funnest part of the whole thing, was seeing the looks on their faces, But anyway, we had a great visit, and when I was leaving, I said, by the way, we're having a reunion. Golf 2-9's having a reunion. She says, you are? When? Where? She says, I'm coming to the reunion, and I'm bringing my whole family.
Wow.
And she did. And they come to the reunion. They come from Detroit, and
wow.
Yeah, her mom comes, and their daughter, Max and her had a daughter, and of course she was a baby, so she never knew her dad. But so anyway, that's one of my favorite stories.
Wow. And
we still call each other every once in a while just to keep in touch. She's retired now and fighting diabetes, but yeah.
I wanted to ask, have you experienced any physical ailments because of your service in Vietnam, such as diabetes?
I've got, not diabetes, I have a lot of neuropathy, and I've had some spinal injuries that certainly account for part of it, but it may not be all of it, and I've got circulation problems.
No prostate cancer?
Not yet. Foot and lower leg. They did have me, I was having hemorrhages in my feet that were unexplained. They put me in the deep vein thrombosis study at the VA, and for a year. And it was almost comical. The guy says, "I can't believe you're still alive after a year." Well, I'm still alive, but that is a threat for me. The most embolisms and strokes originate from your feet, the clots in your lower legs and feet. So anyway, that's a threat. But I learned law. Every day above ground's a good day, and for me, it's all gravy. The guy who shot my 2 radio operators on 21 April 69 stopped shooting. And I had ducked, he came over my left shoulder, and he opened fire with his AK-47, and he just shot a short burst. He should have killed all 4 of us in the hole. For some reason, he did the short one. I had ducked down as far as I could, and I was reaching for my 45 because I had handsets in both hands, both battalion and company radios. And I grabbed the 45, and after he stopped shooting and turned around. And so I actually didn't have to shoot him. This guy over here made a Roy Rogers shot right next to my ear and made a perfect shot so that he was incapacitated and couldn't hurt anybody else. Yeah. But when you have those kinds of experiences and all the close calls, in the kind of situation I was involved in, you learn the difference between a close shot and an incredibly close shot. The close shots zing when they go by you. The ones that there's really hardly any gap at all between you and the bullet, they actually crack or make a pop. So, but as they trained me in the Marine Corps before I went, close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. And you wouldn't believe how valuable that is. Because a lot of people are traumatized by close calls. Guys, just 3 seconds, and I'd have been dead. But that's as good as 9 days, because you're not even hurt. But it really is true. Close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. So those things never I think had a real bad impact on me. And the other thing that's really invaluable, I think, for dealing with trauma is if you can figure out the humor of the situation, then you will totally neutralize that trauma. And we've seen it over and over and over again, and I used it in the oak bomb workshops with people who were traumatized. You got to let them cry as much as they want to, but if there's a funny view of it that they will accept when you mention it, you'll watch it. You'll watch them go above and beyond the trauma and back on the road to normal type of living. We had to make a forced march to get to an old landing zone to get lifted out, to be moved, my company. And we had trouble getting there because of the triple canopy, but we finally got there. When we got there, much to our chagrin, we found somebody there before us had had left a bunch of 60 millimeter mortar ammo, which is horrible because the bad guys are going to use this for booby traps, and they're going to use it against you. So unforgivable. But I told my mortar section that we had a captured NVA 61 millimeter mortar, which was handheld, and you just load it and point it. And by now, my guys were really, really good with it. It was immediate and very effective. You start lobbing mortars at somebody that's shooting at you, and they're going to quit real quick, great countermeasure. So I told them, why don't you guys just practice here and use up all this old ammo while we're waiting for the helicopters. Well, I was standing beside them with 2 other guys, and they're popping all these rounds off, and then suddenly you hear this sound you never want to hear in a mortar. It's instead of a healthy explosion out of there, it's a kind of a poop. It's a short round. You got bad powder or something, and this thing just comes out, and it's going to land right where that door is. And with a 60 millimeter mortar, you're dead. And so when that happens, the three of us all have the same reaction, the universal response to those kinds of situations. Oh, shit. And we all squat. We had a nice foxhole in front of us, some ways up there. And we all squatted just like bullfrogs and leaped through the air to try to see if we could land in the foxhole before the round landed here and killed us. And we're halfway there. In these kind of situations, your mind functions a totally different way. So everything is in extreme slow motion. You have time for all sorts of thoughts, alternatives, all sorts of things. We're halfway there, and I calculate this isn't going to work. It's going to land before I get to the hole. And believe it or not, improvise, adapt, survive. I started doing this as hard as I could with my arms to see if I could accelerate by swimming through the air to speed up a little bit. It's the only thing. And then I realized within a few strokes that this isn't going to work. And I thought that was funny. But my first thought was, well, I'm going to die. And my parents, the first thing they're going to say, the universal question is, did he suffer? And I just hope somebody says no. As a matter of fact, Jim thought it was funny. He was laughing, because I started laughing out loud. Well, we hit the ground. This was a dud. It didn't go far enough to arm, so it can't go off. So it just does nothing. So, and here's the funny part. We hit the ground there, and I'm really laughing. Well, these two Marines next to me do not think this is funny at all. And they're both looking at me like, you better explain this or we're going to kill you. I mean, this is not funny to them. And then I explained it to them. Well, they still didn't think it was all that funny, but they accepted it, why I was laughing.
Right.
But anyway, so I have a feeling that experience to them, they may still have nightmares about. To me, it's still funny. It's still a joke. It's a funny thing that happened in the war.
Wow.
That it didn't work, and it struck me as being funny that this doesn't help.
Wow.
But that's the value of humor. Christopher Reeves came here and talked when he was paralyzed, remember? Superman?
I've heard of it, yeah.
Yeah. And he fell off his horse in Virginia and broke his neck. He gave a very interesting talk. I went. When it was over, question and answers, and a co-ed said, Mr. Reeves, you said a lot of people who have this injury, they just die. They give up and quit and die. When did you know you were going to make it? And he immediately smiled. He says, well, I was in ICU, and I was feeling so sorry for myself. I was so upset that I was shutting everybody off. I wouldn't communicate with anybody, and I just stared at the ceiling and feeling sorry for myself. So one day somebody came up next to me, and I could see green here to here and dark up here, and I didn't look. I just felt it's a doctor, And he starts talking to me, and I'm going, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense. I'm in a hospital in Virginia, and this doctor is speaking to me with a Russian accent. And so I thought, well, I don't care, until the doctor says, I'm a proctologist. So he says, I figure, well, okay, this guy's going to get personal. I better respond, because he's going to get real personal here. And I looked over, and it's my lifelong friend and roommate at Juilliard, Robin Williams. He's dressed, did you see 9 months or whatever, where he was a doctor, baby doctor?
Oh yeah.
Did you see that?
I think I had.
And he screwed everything up. He was always making mistakes and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Hilarious. Well, he's dressed in the same outfit. He says, so I looked over, and it's my good friend Robin Williams, and I laughed. And that was the moment I knew I was going to make it. Value of humor.
Wow.
The value of humor. It melts it. It neutralizes the trauma.
Do you think that perhaps for some individuals, that's why you hear a lot of guy humor in the film?
Gallows humor?
Yeah.
Oh, it's necessary in emergency rooms, in hospitals, and in law enforcement, but you can't let the public hear you. But they do it to stay sane.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no question. And there's probably nothing more effective.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It seems that you've been instrumental in helping others deal with trauma, to say the least. Was there help available to you to deal with trauma upon your return from Vietnam?
No, not then. And I didn't go in until 85 when I got depressed because of all the publicity about the fall of Vietnam, Saigon. To this day, in April, if you drive by my house, in April, you will see a Vietnamese flag and an American flag flying. I do that for them, and for all the people that I knew whose lives were wasted over there, but I'm not forgetting. Yeah, no, in those days it really wasn't. We already knew all about it, but we have to learn over and over again. We knew about what we now call PTSD from the prior wars, where we called it shell shock and all sorts of stuff. But Rembrandt knew about it when he painted the man in the golden helmet. Can you picture that painting? It's a soldier in a golden helmet, and he's got the look on his face, unmistakable look. I was teaching in Zutphen, Holland, and the Dutch police officer said, when you're talking about trauma, guys being traumatized and stuff, how do you know? And I said, I know from experience, from working with so many people. I can look in their eyes, I can tell you. Mm-hmm. And they said, but how can you describe that? And I said, one of the best thoughts I've ever had in my life. I said, you remember Rembrandt's Dutch, I said, do you remember Rembrandt's painting of the man in the golden helmet? Oh, yeah. I said, that's the look. It was like better than you could write it if you look at that face.
I'm going to get out of here and I'm going to go look at that picture today.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you can, just pull it up on the internet and you'll have it.
So
is this your card? You want me to keep this?
I
or?
want you to keep that.
Okay.
If you had one contribution to society that you've made through your life that you would want future generations to know about, what would that be?
Well, other than helping bring two great young men into the world, it would be probably that I started the FBI's chaplains program, which has saved a lot of lives and done a lot of good. It was something we didn't have for 82 years. There was no excuse for not having it. When you're in that line of business, you better have it, because your people are going to be exposed to things where they need spiritual help. Even if they're not religious, they're going to need spiritual help. I remember speaking at the Oklahoma Highway Patrol thing. Their building is named after an old trooper who's a legend. And he was still alive when I spoke there, and it was to the police chaplains. And he got up and said, in 1925 or some crazy year like that, way back, I was sent to a 7-fatality automobile accident out in rural Oklahoma on a highway. I was there for 9 hours. I really needed a chaplain. We didn't have any chaplains. Said, I'm glad you're here. So that's the experience. Our guys, they're disaster squad and everything, they have to work plane crashes and stuff, and with remains and horrible scenes. Fortunately, they don't even show the worst part of it over there in the plane crash right now, but the smells and the sights are things you never forget. So you need all the help you can get, all the support you can get, and that's the thing I think when I was asked to take over the FBI's trauma program by the number 2 guy in the FBI, John Otto, he said, he asked me, I was 42 years old then, he said, Jim, are you up to this job? And I said, John, I think the good Lord's been preparing me for this job for 42 years. And that's the way I look at the hard knocks that I've had in life, the tough growing experiences, is that you can use those to validate other people's similar experiences. And I have no secrets now because of that program. There's not a secret I had I didn't share with somebody who told me they had gone through something similar, and you validate by saying, yeah, me too, and then you talk about it.
Interesting. Well, as an American, someone who's grew up in a democracy, I would like to thank you personally for your dedication to the service of the United States. And as
Thank you.
As a historian, I would like to thank you for sharing your story with
You
us
bet.
so that future generations can learn.
You bet.